All right, my squires, I am the Night Owl, and welcome back to part 4 of my Brothers War set review. Yes, that's right, the glorious work is not yet complete. As it turns out, we still have many gifts from the Father of Machines here yet to review. I discovered that these retro artifacts, while I thought were just going to be a cool little piece of texture in the booster packs, are actually going to be present in the draft packs. So these are actually, they're going to be part of the draft format. And as such, they're not only going to add texture to the booster pack, so they're going to add texture to the format. I think this is actually kind of a really neat addition. They're going to be these kind of like super rares, and that I think there's going to be one per pack, and so I think just having them sprinkled throughout really will kind of make for interesting builds and interesting games. I really kind of like this. It adds a lot of spice to the drafts in general. And while some of these are, of course, absurd, like for the most part, they all seem like reasonable cards that just add a little bit more give and take to the packs. And I think it's kind of a nice addition. I think it should be really cool. So I'm kind of excited for this. Plus, also, they're just super cool that they're all retro artifacts that they're coming back from Magic's past. You see here that I'm going to be reviewing the schematic art of each of these just because I think that they're nifty. It's just kind of my choice to do that. But yeah, these are all super sweet. So I'm kind of excited for this. So let's get into it. So our first retro artifact is Adaptive Automaton. It is a 3-mana construct. It is a 2/2. As Adaptive Automaton enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Adaptive Automaton is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Okay, so I think that this is going to be kind of a nice addition to the format. 3-mana 2/2, of course, is a little weak, but it does have a really nice ability on it. No matter what your deck ends up looking like, this will add a +1/+1 to whatever creatures you happen to have on the board. Ideally, you do want to consolidate in a couple of creature types to maximize this, and I think the most common use case of this obviously is going to be with the soldier tokens. There's a bunch of soldiers in the set. It's already kind of the only tribal theme, unless you count like Tanos's birds and beasts thing. Again, I still haven't looked to see how many of those there are, but yeah, so primarily in a soldier deck, this will be like really, really kind of nice. Otherwise, it'll just be kind of okay. A 3-mana 2/2 that might boost one or two of the other creatures is all right. Overall, I give this about a B. I think that, again, pick this, play with some soldier tokens, and this will be a nice solid addition to your deck. All right, up next we have Aetherflux Reservoir. It is a 4-mana artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. Pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to any target. Well, I think the 50 life is a pipe dream. I mean, somebody proved me wrong. I hope that one day one of you gets to go off with this and just like nug somebody for 50. But realistically, I don't think that that's going to happen in most limited games. Yeah, so really this is just kind of a really awkward life gain spell, and I think it kind of goes into F tier. It's going to be kind of rare that you cast multiple spells a turn anyways. I mean, double spell turns aren't super common in limited. Like, in the sense that they probably happen like every limited game somebody has a double spell turn. However, that's like the minority of your turns. So typically this is just going to be like kind of like gain 1 life a turn for on a 4-mana artifact. I don't think that that's good enough. Even if every now and then you get a couple more life points, I think that this is an F. Okay, we have Altar of Dementia. Altar of Dementia is a 2-mana artifact. Sacrifice a creature. Target player mills cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Well, this is certainly a build around, though I don't really think it gets there well enough. So the two basic use cases for this are either going to be to set up your own mill strategies, in which case you can do that, but throwing away your actual board presence to do that is like such a high cost. Like, a lot of the other cards that mill you, it's like you're playing a creature, and that creature might even draw you a card, and then that card mills you. Whereas this is like you get to throw your creatures away on top of casting this 2-mana artifact to get some mills, and it's only like the better creatures that even like mill you a significant amount. I think it's kind of like a build around D. It's just like if you're really going off the mill thing, this is like a really poor way to do that. The actually more reasonable way to play this, and I'm not condoning this, but the real use case I actually see for this is kind of like is sort of like the hurling Cyclops sort of thing, where it's like you just throw your entire board at the opponent, you just kind of one shot them, not one shot them, but like it just in kind of like one fell swoop, you just kill them by milling their entire deck. The players are going to be self-milling a lot, which means deck sizes are going to get kind of small. And so, milling the opponent is kind of funny because most of the time, when everybody has so many mill and graveyard synergies, that's a really bad idea until it gets to the point that their deck size is so low that it becomes a significant threat. I still don't think that this is good for that. Like, what you like sideboard this in against your opponent's mill strategy so that when they get super low, this doesn't enable their synergies but actually kills them. It just seems weak. It just seems like an F to me. In very specific circumstances, maybe you could sneak this into your deck, but even then, I think it's going to be on the low weak end of anything you can do with it. I think it's an F. All right, next we have Ashnod's Altar. Ashnod's Altar is a 3 mana artifact, sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless. Well, it's kind of the same as Altar of Dementia. You can like throw your board presence away for a couple points of mana, I suppose. But it's just really not even amazing at that. Like, say you got like a 9 or 10 drop, artifact creature in your hand. Yeah, you can like start throwing your soldier tokens away and like running that out really quick. But, say you cast Ashnod's Altar, you sacrifice like 2 soldiers or 3 soldiers to make 4 or 6 mana, you cast your big creature, and then it just eats a disenchant. Well, you've cast this altar and sacrificed a bunch of soldiers, and then lost to the thing that you ran out. I just don't think it's good enough. I think that it's an F. If you have a very specific deck like that's like super going in on this, again, like there's always this caveat for these kind of cards because they are like build arounds, and you can technically build around them. And I think a lot of these cards are going to fit in this category where it's like, yeah, you could build around this if you want, but is even doing that even is that good? Probably not. It's still probably super risky and kind of a bad plan. I just think that this is an F as well. All right, here we have Astral Cornucopia. It's for XXX is the Vin Diesel card. Astral Cornucopia enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. Tap, choose a color. Add 1 mana of that color for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. Yeah, probably not. No. So I'm probably going to use this term a lot, and forgive me because I kind of have a habit of this, of like relating cards to other cards by name. So, for example, I was about to call this a Manalith. If you don't know what a Manalith is, it's a 3 mana artifact. Tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So I tend to refer to all like 3 mana artifacts as Manaliths. You'll hear me do that. Hear me call things like Windrakes and things like that. If that gets confusing for you, sorry. Like it's one of those things where it's like I don't even recognize that I'm using like a term. Like it's just like how I think of these things in my mind. So, anyways, so this is like a Manalith. Except instead of being able to make any color, you just get to make 1 color of your choosing, which is not that big of a drawback because typically like with manaliths, like it's usually like just the added mana is like what's good, and then it might help you cast your splash color, and you don't need it to make like every color. And the same is going to be true for this. Like if you have a splash card, you need it to make a specific color. That's fine. I should say part of the reason I'm talking about Manalith is Manaliths already are like pretty bad. Like those are not a good card type. Those are like a D. Like they're very poor. Spending 3 mana on like a ramps artifact is just not really where it's at. It just doesn't do enough typically. Um, and I put this in the same category. Now, so this is the downside of this compared to a normal Manalith is you only get to make 1 color. The upside is you could pay it for like 6, and then this becomes like a tap for 2. I just don't think that that's good enough. Like maybe again, you're trying to cast 9 or 10 mana artifact creatures, and it's like, well, you can pay this like 6. You could tap out for 6, and this will add 2, and it'll get you closer. But that's just not an amazing card, anyways. I also think that this is like a D, close to an F. Just cards that you have to like tap out so much mana for, even if they like give you an additional mana at like stage 3 of the game. There's a big difference between like playing like a Llanowar Elf that'll like start tapping on turn 1 and give you additional mana every turn of the game, and like tapping out on turn 3 and then getting additional mana from that point. Like that obviously that sounds like a difference, but what I'm saying is like the difference is like even bigger than you would think. It's such a big difference. It's just that these kind of cards typically are not very good. So I'm going to put this as like a D minus. It's like just barely playable if you're really in the market for like an artifact that also ramps you a little bit, but it's pretty poor. All right, you have Blackblade Reforged. It is a 2 mana equipment. Equipped creature you control gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Equip legendary creature 3. Equip 7. Okay, so this one's really tough to rate. So first of all, obviously it gets a lot better if you have a bunch of legendary creatures. How often are you going to have a bunch of legendary creatures? I mean, there are legends in this set, but like you might have like one. It's not like a big theme. It's like you might have 1, maybe 2, and so the rest of the time you really kind of have to evaluate this as an equip 7, and then every now and then it has like the kind of bonus of like it only costs me 3. The ability on this is really good. This makes whatever you equip this to absolutely gigantic. If you have enough for equip 7, I mean, like maybe you have like 5 lands and some power stones or something like that. That's like +5/+5 on the equip. That's a lot. That's really a lot. But equip 7 is so expensive. Like, say you do that and then the creature dies and you have to like go to equip it again. This is hard to rate. It's hard to rate because it really depends on if you actually have the time to do that sort of thing. It's a big effect though. It's a really big effect. I'm gonna rate this as like a D plus. And of course, if you got a bunch of legends, like if you even get 2 or 3 legends in your deck, this becomes a little bit better. So I kind of gave my spiel on equipment before that I think it's really bad. I really don't like equipment. But this has the kind of outsized effect that like I'm a little more interested in it. But equip 7 is so gross. So I think in very specific decks, like if you have like a bunch of like both soldier tokens and power stone tokens, this becomes like kind of legitimate. Some decks might not be interested in this. So I'll say it's really risky, it's really expensive, but the effect size is there. So I'm gonna put it like a D plus at first, but it might perform for you a little bit better than that in certain situations. It's only a D plus because of how expensive it is, not because the effect itself is bad. All right, here we have the opposite end of the spectrum, the Bone Saw. Bone Saw is a 0 mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0, equip 1. Well, this is both cheap on the front end and then more importantly, cheap on the equip part, which is the part of the equipment cards that I really care about because ideally to make the cards worth it, you end up equipping them a number of times. This is cheap on both ends, and that's what I like my equipment to be, but the effect is so undersized on this one. Just +1/+0. It's just not worth the card. The cost is right here, but I don't want to spend an entire card on just +1/+0, that even if I get to move it around a bunch. This again looks like a D minus to me, maybe an F. Like it is a 0 mana artifact. You get to trigger your artifact like synergies for free, I suppose. So maybe this will play a little bit better, but the impact here is so small. It's so small. I'm just really not interested in this card. All right, now we have Burnished Heart. Burnished Heart is a 3 mana elk. It's a 2/2. 3, sacrifice Burnished Heart. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. I think this card's kind of good. So I can't remember what set this was initially printed in, but I seem to remember it being like an acceptable card in that set. Not amazing, but acceptable. And I actually think it's going to be a little bit better here in Brothers War. So 3 mana 2/2, little anemic, but it has a decent ability. Now the ability is expensive. That's the part of the problem with this card this card that's a problem is that it's 3 mana up front and then 3 mana to sacrifice it. But the fact that it's like a creature out the gate, like you could just use this to block, and that's like reasonable. And then I think this all adds up to like being like decent because again, it's a creature. You could use it to like block and trade, or you can use it to like block and then activate the ability. So you like buy yourself some life. And then double ramp is actually pretty big, especially when you're trying to cast like a big expensive creature. So finding 2 basic lands is actually big game. It also goes with all your art. Although now I'm not going to be able to keep this from coming out of my mouth. I understand that these are all artifacts, but this also goes with your artifact synergies. And then it also goes with your sacrifice deck synergies. Like it's because it's something that sacrifices itself, it will trigger like some of your other like sacrifice effects, like your Gixian infiltrators and things like that. So altogether, I think this will actually be decent. Not amazing. It's probably like in the C range, just because it's so expensive. But because it's a 3 mana 2/2, again, a little overcosted, it's not like you're paying like a huge premium to get this ability. So I think all of the parts together make this decent enough that it's worth playing. All right, next we got Caged Sun. It's a 6 mana artifact. As Caged Sun enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures in control of the chosen color get +1/+1. Whenever a land's ability causes you to add 1 or more mana of the chosen color, add 1 additional mana of that color. So this is kind of the opposite to Burnished Heart in that I think this card is decent, but there are some things about Brothers War that make it worse. Namely that you're going to have like a bunch of colorless creatures. So typically in a standard like multicolor set where you're just like playing 2 different colors, like your creatures are already split between 2 different colors. And so it's like this would only like improve half of your creatures, which is not nothing, but it's still only half your creatures. But because there are so many artifact creatures in this set, especially because the tokens are colorless artifact creatures, this will only like improve a fraction of your creatures depending on what your deck makeup looks like. So the creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1 ability is actually like way worse than it looks because it's like gonna like maybe like a quarter of your creatures it's going to improve. Actually, more interesting on this one is the double mana ability for the lands because there are so many expensive creatures and so many expensive activated abilities that there's so many mana sinks that actually making like 1,000,000 mana on some boards is going to be good enough. Altogether, I put this at like maybe like a C. I don't think it's like amazing or anything like that, but it does enough between like adding a little pump to some of your creatures and making a bunch of mana that the 6 mana price tag's really high, but it has a decent effect when you cast it. I just don't think this is ever going to do anything that amazing because I don't think it's going to be like the situation where you like make your entire board of creatures better and have like 1,000,000 mana. Like, it just. if you do have the kind of deck where it's like you're trying to like attack with like a bunch of creatures of the same color, like you might not even be able to get you good use of the mana ability, so it has kind of like tension there too. The sum of all its parts puts it at about a C for me, but it is like pretty expensive. I don't think that this is going to do like anything insane in the set. All right, now we have Chromatic Lantern. It's a 3-mana artifact. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and then it has tap, add 1 mana of any color. So this is like Manalith Plus, okay? That said, I still don't think it's very good. This is not like a multicolor set by any means. In fact, if anything, it's kind of close to the opposite, where there's a couple cards that incentivize you for having like all lands of the same type. Not that you're going to be doing that a ton, but like that exists in the set more than the multicolor aspect, right? So I don't think this is going to do like a ton of fixing for you. It's basically just a Manalith. It gets interesting with like some of the card, like if you have like the mythic worm that you could pay like Grixis colors to like get a bunch of effects for. I guess that's kind of interesting. I don't know, but that seems like a stretch, you know. Overall, again, I put this in like the D range. Like I just don't think Manaliths are that good. And the color fixing aspect of it is just really not all that important here. If you have the right deck for this, like if you are trying to go deep, like maybe you draft like a bunch of colorless cards, and then I don't know if this is the kind of deck that could exist in the format, but I don't know if it does, where it's like you draft like predominantly colorless cards, and then you're just playing like a mana base that's like 4 different colors because you only have like a couple cards of each color, and you try to make that work somehow. This could have like a role in that sort of a thing, I guess. Um, Overall, though, I think it's pretty poor. I think it's like a D. All right, we have Chromatic Star. Chromatic Star is a 1-mana artifact. 1 and tap, sacrifice Chromatic Star, add 1 mana of any color. When Chromatic Star is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. Okay, so I think that this is kind of in the same boat as like the other cards that produce multiple colors of mana, where like that's just not going to be that valuable of an effect in this set, I don't think. Um, that said, this thing is like really well, not costless. It costs 1 and then 1 again, except that you get that mana back, so it like doesn't even cost that 1 again. So really, ultimately, they just cost you 1 mana and cycles. The thing is, I think that this doesn't do anything except like fill your deck with air. It basically just cycles. So if it gives you close to a 39 card deck, I don't know how important that is. Like, it just seems really minor. It's like a C in that you can play it and it'll like trigger your artifact synergies and then just replace itself. It doesn't seem like it's all that important to do, um, but it also doesn't hurt you at all either. So I'm just gonna put it as like a C. It doesn't do anything, but it's also painless. So yeah. All right, we have Cloud Key. Cloud Key is a 3-mana artifact. As Cloud Key enters the battlefield, choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 mana less to cast. I think this is worse than a Manalith. So it goes in the Manalith category. It's a 3-mana artifact that generates you mana, right? Except unlike something that just like taps for mana like Chromatic Lantern, this only will give you mana because it like gives you a mana for like whatever the chosen card type is. So you can't even use the mana on like anything. You can't use it on abilities. You can't use it on like sorceries if you pick creature or whatever. So it's like extremely focused. And then the win you get for that, again, a brief aside here, and I kind of mentioned this before when I was talking about like the Ashnod's Intervention, the trick. It's really useful to like think of like a base template card that cards like approximate, and then see like what their like downsides compared to that are, and then its upside. And maybe that's like really obvious to some of you, but I just want to explain like really clearly like why I like refer to cards as other cards so much. So Cloud Key, unlike a Manalith, can't spend its mana on anything. It's only for the specific card type. But then the upside compared to the Manalith is that if you have like a double spell turn where you're like trying to cast like 2 artifacts, this will actually make like 2 mana for you on that turn, right? I think ultimately the downside is so much bigger than the upside that ultimately that this is an F. Even if you're playing like I don't know, like a 17 creature deck or something like that, and you choose creature with this, the chances of you like having like a double spell turn still pretty weak. This also doesn't make any color mana, and again, it doesn't use mana for like any of the other things you could possibly use mana for. Like even if you choose creature, like I don't think you can. It doesn't work for like unearth abilities or anything like that. I think it just has like enough downsides compared to like a card type that I already don't like that I think Cloud Key is just an F. All right, next we have Defense Grid. Defense Grid is a 2-mana artifact. Each spell costs 3 more to cast, except during its controller's turn. Yeah, no, this doesn't do it. So it does prevent like instants from like happening on your turn, but savvy opponents will just save their instants and like yeah they lose a little bit of value, but then they'll just cast them on their turn instead of like trying to like get extra value out of them. It's like okay, I guess you've like made me cast this on my own turn instead of your turn, and meanwhile you spent this entire card on making this happen, and then it also like doesn't even like effectively work that well because like your opponent could just have the mana to do it, you know. Now they can't pay for this with Power Stones. There's a lot of these effects where it's like, oh, you can pay for this with Power Stones, but because each spell costs 3 more, it like adds it actually to the mana cost, so it doesn't. It's not like you pay an additional 3 to like pay this spell. It's like the spell costs more, so that the Power Stones don't work. But still, you'll hit a point where like it's like, oh, I can even just pay around the defense grid anyways. Plus, it's like symmetrical, so like this will affect your instants too. And no matter what, you spent an additional card on this. This just does not do anything and takes an entire card for you. No, this is an F. Don't play defense grid. All right, Door to Nothingness. Oh boy. So it's a 5-mana artifact. Door to Nothingness enters the battlefield tapped. White, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green, tap. Sacrifice Door to Nothingness. Target player loses the game. That's a hell of a text line. That said, I just don't know if you're gonna do this. I mean, get the Chromatic Lantern going, I guess. You know, I don't know. It seems so impossible to get that mana cost going that like it's listen, if you could do this and you know, actually like nug somebody with this, congratulations, send me a screenshot. I hope you do it. This is an F because you're basically never ever going to do this. It's almost impossible to do. But if you're the kind of person who likes going in for this kind of stuff, power to you. Everybody else, just ignore this. You can't Door to Nothingness people. That casting cost is impossible. All right, we have Elsewhere Flask. It is a 2-mana artifact. When Elsewhere Flask enters the battlefield, draw a card. Sacrifice Elsewhere Flask, choose a basic land type. Each land you control becomes that type until end of turn. Okay, so this is a little bit like Chromatic Start. Like, this really doesn't hurt you that bad for putting it in your deck. You cast it for 2, triggers your artifact stuff, and it replaces itself immediately. Okay, pretty painless, I guess. You know, you're like fiddling around for 2 mana. I already kind of don't like doing that sort of stuff. Like, I mean, you've heard me talk about cards like Impulse and what's the card in this one? It starts with a C. The Surveil to draw a card. It's Curate. Yeah, I already kind of don't like fiddling around with my mana just to draw a card, and this like just replaces itself. It doesn't even like give you any sort of like selection or anything like that. So it's like painless, but I don't like doing this sort of thing. Like even if you can stick it in your deck for free, it's the mana cost still to me is like hurts more than what you're getting out of it, even though it's minor either way. Does that make sense? But then Sacrifice Elsewhere Flask, choose a basic land type. Each land you control becomes that type of until end of turn. So like it like gets you out of color screw like once. Or the actual biggest use case I see for this is if you're playing like a deck with like Corrupt, like say you're playing like multiple Corrupts, but you're playing like a split like black-green deck or something like that. The Corrupts could be fine on their own because it's like you're playing like 9 Swamps, 8 Forests or something like that. And so you're like, okay, well my Corrupts won't be amazing, but they're like decent. But then if you play an Elsewhere Flask alongside those, you could have turns where it's you turn all of your lands into swamp and then like hit people with super fat Corrupts. I think that's like the biggest use case I see for these. If you pick up a couple of those kind of cards, that's really really super narrow. But like, if you already are like putting Corrupts in your deck or those kind of cards, and you see an Elsewhere Flask, yeah, it's reasonable. It just replaces itself and triggers your synergies. And then actually there's something to be said for like the sacrifice abilities on these two, because some of these will like trigger your synergies. It's like a very minor, painless, relatively synergy piece, but ultimately doesn't really do anything. It's like a C minus. It's like you could put it in your deck, but it doesn't do anything all that special, but it also doesn't hurt you that bad. All right, up next we have Foundry Inspector. Foundry Inspector is a 3-mana construct. It is a 3/2. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 mana less to cast. Here's a card. This is a good one. So 3 mana 3/2 is a not great body, but fine if it has a good ability, and this has a good ability. There are lots of artifact spells. And because it reduces the cost of them and doesn't like tap for mana, not only does this like do duty as a creature, like you can like attack for it, as opposed to like a card that like taps for mana, you know. You can attack and block with this thing. But also like it can result in like double spell turns where it's like you cast multiple artifact spells in one turn. So this could like attack as a 3-power creature and then allow you and then like give you 2 mana by allowing you to cast 2 artifact spells. This is a really good card. I think it's a B. Again, the body's a little undersized, but it doesn't hurt that bad when you have an ability this good on it. If you have lots and lots of artifact spells in your deck, this is just like it's like a mana creature that also attacks and blocks. It's like really pretty solid. Solid B. All right, up next, Gilded Lotus. It is a 5-mana artifact. Tap. Add 3 mana of any one color. Okay, so I typically don't like mana artifacts. Like I've been already like talking down on like all of the different types of manaliths we've seen, like the 3 mana 1 mana, the 3 mana to cast 1 mana artifacts. Gilded Lotus is materially different. Tapping to add 3 mana is like gigantic game. Now, you're only going to want this in decks that have like huge mana sinks. Again, like big expensive creatures, maybe creatures with big unearth costs. Like, yeah, you're playing like a bunch of prototype creatures or something like that. Or you have like a bunch of activated abilities. Like, you really you don't want to just play this. You really want to make sure that you have like a bunch of mana sinks in your deck, okay? And more than just like one, too, because like if your deck like tops out at like 6 and then you have like one like 8 mana card, this ain't it. It doesn't do good enough. But if you have like really a deck that's really trying to power off these expensive things, 3 mana on one card is big game. Not only does it like accelerate you a lot, which is important, like getting things so much sooner, but cards that make multiple mana, in a way, it's also like sort of a form of card advantage. Now, this is a little less true in a world with Power Stones, kind of, because or you could consider Power Stones a form of this as well. Here's what I'm getting at with this. Say you have like a 9 mana card to cast, okay, and you're just trying to cast that with contemporary mana sources, like either like lands or like creatures that tap for 1 mana or something like that. Essentially, a 9 mana spell requires 9 individual cards to get that onto the battlefield. You have to have like some kind of like 7 lands and 2 creatures that tap for 1 mana, but 9 cards that in order to cast this spell are required. But if you have spells that make multiple mana from one card, then it's actually like kind of a weird form of card advantage, because if you have a Gilded Lotus, right, and then are trying to cast that 9 mana spell, you actually only need 7 individual cards, because it's like, 5 lands, a 1 mana creature, and then the Gilded Lotus, and that's actually enough mana. So in a way, you need less total. It's not just acceleration. You need less total cards to get that spell onto the battlefield. So it's kind of like pseudo card advantage in a way. Only very specifically, like if you were like trying to cast these big mana creatures, but the point is, like, you don't need to, like, a lot of times another way to power these cards out, like not to cast like these 9 mana spells, um isn't to like ramp them out exactly, but it is to like get to a stage of the game where you have drawn enough cards that you have those mana sources, and this reduces the total number of cards that you have to draw in order to cast those spells. So you can do it earlier in the game and with like less like total cards drawn, either between like natural draw steps or card advantage spells. So I know it's kind of a funny way of looking at it, but my point is that making 3 mana on one spell is way different than making 1 mana on one spell. Even though I'm typically not a fan of these like expensive spells that only generate other mana, adding 3 on one card is materially different. So I actually think this is kind of decent. It's a little bit of a build around. You're not going to want this in every deck. In very specific decks, it becomes decent. But in specific decks, it becomes like a C plus, almost like B minus type card. Where like, yeah, if you have like a bunch of the prototype spells or whatever, then you have a Gilded Lotus, you basically can start to afford to like not cast the cheap side of the prototype spells and say, no, I'm actually going to be able to cast all of these for their expensive side. And that's like a great way to win a game. So build around C plus B minus in specific decks. Actually pretty good. The mana fixing ability, I rate mana fixing really low in this set. I don't think it's going to be a huge part of what we're doing here, but it could be. All right, Goblin Charbelcher. It's a 4 mana artifact. 3 and tap. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card. Goblin Charbelcher deals damage equal to the number of non-land cards revealed this way to any target. If the revealed land card was a mountain, Goblin Charbelcher deals double that damage instead. Put the revealed cards at the bottom of your library in any order. I'll be honest, I don't know how to rate this. It seems really bad. Cards that have really random effects typically are very poor, because you want to be able to spend your mana reliably on stuff. And this is so expensive between the 4 up front and the 3 for each activation that, like, paying 3, revealing a land card immediately is like a huge failure. Like, that's just a big fail. But this card does allow you, if you get to like activate it like every single turn for multiple turns, even if it's like a little like awkward sometimes, it does allow you to like start machine gunning your opponent's stuff to a degree. I'm inclined to think that it's an F. I think you definitely want to be paying red, because you really want to be revealing mountains with this to make the targeting more reliable. I probably wouldn't look at this if I wasn't playing red or had a bunch of mountains in my deck. If I am playing red and I have kind of a more late game control deck, this is a repeatable removal spell. Even if it doesn't work every turn, like say I just get like some Power Stones going, I don't have much better going on, I basically get to roll the dice and just take a shot at like killing one of your creatures every single turn. and it only like has to like work a couple of times before you get your value back out of it. I think that this is like too risky to really be running most of the time. I think it might be close to an F, but like you got a bunch of power stones and not much else to do with them. You could reasonably run this and just kind of roll the dice, and this can win a game. This can win a game. You can also start shooting your opponent to death with it. I don't know. I could be way wrong on this. I think that most of the time it's not going to be good enough, but I will concede that there are going to be times and maybe specific decks where like maybe you can actually like get some use out of this. Basically, the more painless it is to like use this and fail, if you get like a bunch of free chances at doing this, this actually is kind of good. If you're under any kind of pressure, although, you really can't afford to do this and miss. So I think it's an F. Give it a shot though. You actually can't kill people with it. Oh, now here's a card. Helm of the Host. Helm of the Host is a 4-mana equipment. Equip 5. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary. If equipped creature is legendary, that token gains haste. Okay, so this it has what I don't like about equipment, really super expensive equip cost. However, the impact of this card is absurd. The reason I'm fine with the equip cost on this is because if you equip it onto like basically any creature, you get your mana back from this so fast, because not only does it give you card advantage in like the copies of a creature, but also like it gives you the mana back because it's like you're casting that. It's like not only you're drawing that creature but casting that creature every turn. That's what creating a copy is like, right? And so it's an amazing card advantage and mana engine, and it like triggers all your ETBs and stuff. Again, this is the sort of card that like when this card was first released, I think this came out in the original Dominaria set. Um, a lot of people, I think myself included, because so often these cards read this way, is that they assumed that the token only lasted until like end of turn. No, you just get a copy. You just make a clone of your card every single turn for the entire game. And then if that creature dies, you put it on something else and you keep going. And especially if you get like something insane and really obnoxious and you make one token off of it, they can't break the cycle now because they kill your one creature that this is already equipped on. Okay, equip it on the copy that you made. Keep going. So it just is like impossible to stop once this gets started. So this card is a bomb. This is like an A. Pretty expensive, but again, like you like pay 4 for it, pay 5 for it, and then on that turn you immediately like get the 5 back that you paid by creating like a clone of something. Like if you put this on a 5-mana creature, well, it's really like you only just paid like 4, and then on the next turn you just cast a copy of that creature, and then you start getting free copies of that creature every turn. Like you already got the card advantage. Like it's just it works out so much better than it looks. This card is a bomb. Every now and then it's a little too slow, or maybe if your creatures are really dorky, like you're just playing like a bunch of 3/1s or something like that, even then it's still pretty good. And in this set, I think it's going to be the opposite, where it's like it's going to create like gigantic cards. Like it's going to create gigantic cards. I actually have to look into how copies work with prototype. I think it copies the creature as the prototype. So like if you cast the cheaper side of it, I think you still get it as the cheaper side. But I'll have to double check that. I'm pretty sure that's the interaction, but I'm not 100% there. I'll have to confirm. But yeah, no, Helm of the Host, huge bomb. It's an A. All right, Howling Mine. This is a classic. At the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. Let me just give you a little tidbit of history here. So there used to be, way back in the beginning of Magic days, I believe these were called mono artifacts. And mono artifacts. Wait, was it mono artifacts? That was it. So artifacts used to be broken up into like different types. It was very obscure and arcane. I think it was mono artifacts that were the type that they only worked if they were untapped. It was like the if the Howling Mine is untapped clause wasn't on the card. It was part of the card type, the mono artifact, as opposed to like continuous artifacts, which I think worked no matter what. And so, yeah, it was like part of the card type that you would like have to tap this card in order to like turn the effect off, and then you could turn it off that way. But then when they got rid of mono artifacts, they basically errated all the cards to add the if the Howling Mine is untapped clause or like whatever to it. So just a little bit of history there for you. As far as the card itself goes, it's probably like an F. It's just kind of a big problem. Like if you have like ways to like tap this yourself, it's kind of interesting, but like I don't even know if there's like great ways to do that. If you can reliably tap it every turn by yourself, it does become like a one-sided draw engine, so like that's pretty absurd. But if you don't have that, it's pretty unplayable. Not only do you spend the card on this, but then your opponent gets the first card. So like that like increases their card advantage over you, and they get the primacy of like having access to the card first. Like not only do they get the additional card in card advantage sense, but also they get to use their card first. So no, this is like an F. But if you have a way to like keep reliably tapping this, I guess you could break the symmetry and you can go off with it. Ichor Wellspring. Okay, I think this is going to be a really good card in this set. Sorry for the scrolling here. Okay. So, Ichor Wellspring. When Ichor Wellspring enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. I think this is actually going to be like one of the best like divination type effects you can have in your deck. Wow, this art is absurd. It looks like somebody like sticking their hands into the wellspring and like drawing back a stump. I didn't realize that this thing was like that nasty. Dang. Um, Okay, so yeah, so again, it just like cycles up when you first cast it, and then it triggers all your artifact synergies, and then it also goes super good in the sacrifice deck because it gives you like fodder that you don't mind getting rid of, and in fact you want to because then you get to draw an additional card. So I think this card is like a B minus in your sacrifice deck. Like even if you can't sacrifice it like reliably, it still like cycles and triggers your synergies, which I've already mentioned on a bunch of cards. Like that's not really good enough. But say you only have like two ways to sacrifice it. Yeah, play the Wellspring. I think it's fine. Yeah, like if you draw one of those two ways, you get like a bonus card like out of this, and it just cycles on its own. I think it's fine. And then again, yeah, in a dedicated sacrifice deck, this is actually like a really nice card to pick up. Nice little like divination plus sacrifice fodder plus artifact synergy. Great, good card. B minus probably in that deck. All right, Inspiring Statuary. It's a 3 mana artifact. Non-artifact spells you cast have improvise. Well, it's definitely a build around. It's definitely a build around. I don't think it's good enough. Again, this is like it's the kind of build around where if you have both expensive non-artifact spells and then are making like a bunch of tokens, either soldier tokens or power stones, um, you can like have the power stones like help cast your non-artifact spells, or the soldier tokens cast your non-artifact spells, and both of those are pretty good effects. Um, so sorry. And Yeah, so I think that like it's okay, but I just don't see you having a bunch of like expensive non-artifact spells enough and having all the artifacts to like do this. And then again, you're paying like the 3 mana and this card up front. I think it's an F, but it could be like a build around like D plus kind of like. I think it's just too finicky to make work, and the cost is too much between the card and the actual mana cost itself, and tapping all of your stuff to run these non-artifact spells out. I just don't think it'll ever like do quite enough. I think it's an F. All right, Ivory Tower. Ivory Tower is a 1 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain X life, where X is the number of your cards in your hand minus 4. Nah, this just doesn't do it. Even if you run this, say you're on the play and you run this out on turn 1. So you start with 7, you lay your land, and then you cast this. Now you have 5 cards in your hand, and so at the beginning of your upkeep next turn, you gain 1 life. And then if you like lay a land and play a spell, now you're down to 4 and you don't gain any more life off of this. That's horrible. So yeah, it just doesn't do enough. I mean, of course that's on the play, but like you could be on the draw, and it's like what, like a little bit better, I guess. Um, and then that's only like if you like run it out on the first turn, and then like you're incentivized to just keep cards in your hand to like gain a couple of life points, and you still spent an entire card on this. And then what if you draw it on like turn 9? No, this card's horrible. No, no, just don't play it. It's an F. It just doesn't do enough. Even when you hit like the dream scenario with it, it's still bad. And then there's a bunch of fail states with it. Like, nah, it's not good. All right, Jalum Tome. Jalum Tome is a 3 mana artifact. 2 and tap, draw a card, and then discard a card. Interesting. I actually don't know how good this is. So looting is really good. Looting is it's just a really strong ability. And one thing that this has over like a lot of looting effects is that a lot of loots are on creatures which are vulnerable to Reanimator and stuff. Um, or not Reanimator, I'm sorry, removal. Um, so this is not as vulnerable to removal, though there is artifact removal. It probably won't get pointed at this. That said, it is really expensive, 3 up front and then 2 for every loot. So that really does like put a drawback on the power. I think if you have like a really late game deck, especially one that cares about you like playing artifacts, or like has like a lot of like graveyard synergies, I think this is like a C minus. Like it's really slow, but it is a strong effect that like really like makes your hand a lot better, especially like over the course of a long game. Like if you were playing like a control deck, this just can make your hand so much better over the course of a game. Like your draw quality is going to be so much better than your opponent's that it actually does become reasonable. I certainly wouldn't play this in your aggro decks. And again, you can also like set up like your sick graveyard synergies with it. So I think it's like a C minus. It's a little slow. It's a little slow, but Power Stones will actually help a lot. And then if you're like just having two power stones that you're not using otherwise, and then looting every turn with this, it's actually pretty good. Um, it doesn't affect the board, so unlike looting creatures, like some of them actually like do some kind of blocking or something like that, so that should be considered. But a lot of times you're not even getting those into combat anyways. Like, so this is like card disadvantage in the way that like it's not a card that affects the board state, but you can maybe get away with it. It's probably, if your opponent's applying pressure, it's probably like this is probably like a D. But if you're both, if it's like a slow matchup versus a slow matchup, this will actually like really go a long way to helping you win the game. All right, Journeyer's Kite. It's a 2-mana artifact, 3 and tap, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. I think that, so this is technically like draw a card every turn for 3, but it's only ever a land. I kind of don't think that this is going to be good enough. It's really slow, first of all. So 2 and then 3 every turn to like just slowly start drawing cards, and they're only going to be basic lands. That's really slow. Now, you are going to be trying to cast really expensive spells in this set, but the thing is, there are so many cards that do this like sort of exact sort of thing in the decks that are trying to like cast that you don't need to play this like really, really expensive way of just getting basic lands in order to do that. Like, just play like cards that generate power stones passively, and you'll do the exact same thing. Like play like the like Argothian Scavenger or whatever, the card, the 3/2 that makes a power stone. And you're basically doing what this card does, except also making a 3/2 while like for cheaper. There are some sets, like say Power Stones didn't exist in this set, and yet all the expensive creatures still existed. I think this card would actually be kind of decent, but because like this effect is like so replaceable with so many other cards in the set that I don't think you want to play this like stupid expensive way of doing the exact same thing. I think that this is an F. Maybe it fits into the archetype of like, hey, I didn't get there with my synergies. I didn't get enough Power Stones, and I picked all these expensive cards, so I'm going to try to kite my way to victory. Um, God bless you. I hope it works, but it just seems too slow. All right, Keening Stone. It's a 6-mana artifact. 5 and tap. Target player mills X cards, where X is the number of cards in that player's graveyard. Um, okay. So I think that this is a legitimate kill condition. The problem with cards that like mill your opponents in this set is that it sets up so many more of their synergies than it like stops. Like it doesn't really like hurt them very much. Like you're more likely to enable them than you are to hurt them. Except Keening Stone goes off. Like it mills so many cards, and it just does not take very many turns for this to kill people, that like I think that this is like a legitimate kill condition. You can use it to like set your own graveyard synergies up a little bit. I think it's a little expensive for that. Like there are better ways probably to do that than to pay 6 and then to pay 5. But just imagine like your opponent has like 5 cards in the graveyard, only 5 at the point that you're casting this. Like, so they have 5, you mill them, now they have 10. You mill them again, now they have 20. You mill them again, they're dead, right? And they might even like be dead before that, like depending on how many cards they've drawn and like how many cards they have in the graveyard. Like it just takes like a couple of activations, and it just wins the game. Now granted, you need like a lot of space. You have to pay 6, then 5, then 5, then 5. That is so slow. So this is really just like a finisher in like a slower kind of control deck. Um, but it really does the job. And that's considering if they only have 5 cards in the graveyard, whereas like a lot of decks are going to be self-milling. It's not unreasonable for decks to have like 10 cards in the graveyard. Now look, you activate it once, they have 20. You activate it once again, they're dead. So like, and then you can even like do this like end step. So like you cast Keening Stone, and then on the next turn, pass on their end step, activate it, right? Untap, activate it again. They didn't even get a chance to use their graveyard. They just die, right? So it's super expensive. You definitely want to have the time and space to do this sort of thing. It helps if your opponent's milling themselves, but even then, not really, right? Like, because like if you just play like a normal control game, they're going to have like a decently stocked graveyard. So this is a very real finisher card. This will actually kill people. So now, are you going to be that much in the market for a card like this that's a finisher? Depends on the deck. I don't really know where to rate it. It's like almost like a build around, because you want to play this in a very specific deck that can like take advantage of it. Where it's like you both probably have Power Stones to activate it, and you're like in a slower deck that you can afford to take the time to do this. Um, but it's like a B level finisher. Like in assuming you get a chance to do this, like it kills your opponent like not a lot of cards do. But the problem is that's all that it does. It doesn't defend you in any way. It doesn't like advance your game plan in any way. So yeah, I don't really know what letter grade to give cards like that, because B doesn't really give credit to like how good this is at killing your opponent, but also it doesn't really give credit to like how awkward it can be sometimes. So kind of ignore the letter grade on that one and just listen to what I said about it. Okay, so we have Key to the City. Key to the City is a 2-mana artifact. Tap, discard a card. Up to one target creature can't be blocked this turn. Whenever Key to the City becomes untapped, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. I think this card is sick. This card is sick. So this was in the original Kaladesh, I believe. It was in that block. I don't remember if it was in Kaladesh. I'm pretty sure it was Kaladesh. I hope I'm not lying to you. It doesn't matter. And it was even good in that set. And I think that in this set, it actually has multiple things going for it that make it even better. So first of all, this set has a bunch of graveyard synergies. So discarding a card is actually like a great setup ability. Um, so one way of thinking of this card is that it's like a perpetual looter, right? You tap, discard a card, and then untap and pay 2, and it's kind of like Jalum Tome. Like it's like you're paying 2 to loot every turn, even though you're kind of doing it in a backwards direction, and then but you're also getting like a bonus unblockable out of it. But the combination of this, I think, makes it like good enough because like it not only like allows you to loot every turn, but also is like kind of a finisher, where like yeah, you get to set up your hand, and just kind of like loot every single turn as long as you can pay the 2. Um, but that also so it sets up all your graveyard synergies, and then getting one creature through unblocked is it's just a huge stalemate breaker. Like if you can lock the board down, and the creature doesn't even have to be that amazing, and you can just like start getting in there and like actually like creating a lethal threat. On top of that, there are cards that are like like 9 power creatures in this set, where it's like I've talked a number of times about how like I think chump blocking is actually going to be like something that you're going to have to be cognizant of, and this just beats it. It's like I get to like attack with my 8-power creature or whatever, unblockably for like 3 turns, and then they just die. You don't even have to like pay the mana to do the looting thing. Like you could just kill somebody with this thing. Um, so it makes it good in both aggro decks and in control decks. Because it's also like a sick aggro threat, right? Like it's like you get like a bunch of damage and they stabilize at like 5, but then you play Key to the City and suddenly they're not so stable, right? Even if you don't even draw the cards off of it, you can still like set up lethal with this thing, and it draws you cards. So it's just a powerful card in its own right. On top of setting up graveyard synergies and artifact synergies, and you can pay for the ability with Power Stones, which makes the pay two like a lot less painful in this set than it was like even in Kaladesh. I think that this is like kind of I think this is like a B plus. I think it's a really strong card. Really annoying for your opponent. Really makes defense untenable, and also sets up all your synergy stuff. It's pretty good, and just makes your hand better. It does so many different things. It's great. Liquid Metal Coating. Liquid Metal Coating is a 2-mana artifact. Tap. Target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. Yeah, I don't think this is going to do it. So, Liquid Metal Coating, I believe, is an original Scars of Mirrodin. And in Scars of Mirrodin, you had Metalcraft. So you were rewarded for just having multiple artifacts on the battlefield. You needed 3 or more artifacts, I believe, to have your Metalcraft enabled. The thing is, the artifact, I keep saying artifact. What is up with that? Artifact synergies, yeah, sorry. The thing is, the artifact synergies in this set is they actually don't really care about like just like having artifacts in play in the same way. It's like whenever you cast an artifact spell, whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your deck and choose artifact cards. Return target artifact card from your graveyard. Things like that. Things that don't actually care that much about just having an additional artifact permanent on the battlefield. There's really not a lot. Maybe there's like a couple of cards that I can't really even think of right now that might like care about that. Um, but for the most part, it really does not like enable any of your synergies, and so it's like really, really, really poor at that. That was kind of the kind of primary thing that Liquid Metal Coating was good for when it was good in Scars draft. The other thing it does, and I don't think that this is good enough either, is that it turns your opponent's permanents into artifacts so that you can target them with your artifact removal. That sounds good, except like you don't want to play this like 2-mana do nothing just to make your like disenchants a little bit better. When one, your disenchants are probably going to have targets anyways, and two, like it's even if you like say like you target your opponent's best creature, turn it into an artifact, and then you get to disenchant it, that seems really good. But like say that's all that the Liquid Metal Coating ends up doing over the course of a game, it's you still 2-for-1 yourself on that basically because the Liquid Metal Coating isn't doing you anything else, and so it makes that exchange like actually way worse for you. Even if your deck is like a pile of disenchants, and so it's like, well, no, if I get my Liquid Metal Coating, I actually have like I have like 5 disenchants in my deck, and so like now they're just kind of like removal, like anything removal. Even then, it's like that's still not good because that interaction I described is still bad. And well, what happens if you don't draw your Liquid Metal Coating? You're full of, you have so much artifact removal that like you might not like have targets for it if you don't draw the coating. Like I just don't see a world where this like does enough. I think it's just an F. Lodestone Golem is a 4-mana golem 5/3. Non-artifact spells cost 1 more to cast. Well, it's a little bit of a build around. You know, if you have way more artifact spells than non-artifact spells, and especially if your opponent has like a bunch of non-artifact spells, this is really annoying. Like typically these like kind of like tax abilities like aren't amazing. Like if this was just a non-creature artifact, I'd probably say like, nah, you don't want this thing. But the fact that it comes like stapled to a 5/3 is actually reasonable because that's like a solid creature. You can actually like attack with that and stuff, and it can make your opponent's hand extremely awkward while not hurting you very bad. You're gonna know when you want to play this. Like if you have like mostly artifact spells and maybe just a couple of non-artifacts, um, then yeah, it's probably fine. If you have mostly non-artifact spells, you probably don't want it. And even if it doesn't hurt your opponent that bad, like say your opponent has like the exact same deck makeup that you do, where it's like mostly artifact spells, only a couple non-artifacts, well, it's still a 4 mana 5/3, like the floor isn't too bad. So basically, you know, don't play it if you have a bunch of non-artifact spells, and play it if you got a bunch of artifact spells, and you can randomly host people sometimes. And at the very least, you're hitting them for a 5 power, 4 mana creature, you know? So I think your rates is about like a C. I don't think it's like gonna like break the board or anything like that, but there will be times where it is like really super extremely awkward, even if on occasion it'll be awkward for you too. I think you can play around it a little bit. It's probably okay. All right, we have a Maze Mind Tome. It's very very grim looking. Is like the brain is just directly writing onto the book. I wish that my brain worked like that. Like I have like all these like thoughts and ideas in my head, and sometimes it's so hard to like actually get them out like into any meaningful form for me to share them with anyone else, that I wish I could just like take my brain and just like rub it on a page and just have what I have in my head come out. But that's not how the creative process works. Anyways, Maze Mind Tome is a 2 mana artifact. Tap, put a page counter on Maze Mind Tome, scry 1. 2 and tap, put a page counter on Maze Mind Tome, and draw a card. When there are 4 or more page counters on Maze Mind Tome, exile it. If you do, gain 4 life. Yeah, I think this card is good. I think this card is good. I think that even if it was just 2 mana, with and then it only hit the scry ability on it, and then you would gain 4, it would definitely be on the low end, but I think that that would still be a playable card because like paying 2 to scry 4 and gain 4, even though that is slow, is probably worth your mana. It's probably good enough. And the fact that this like also draws cards and you have the space and mana to do that is even better. And then, you know, the ever the refrain, power stones also help with this, and so you have a couple power stones, you actually get to draw cards a lot more than you would like in other sets where this card was printed. So I actually think that this card is like a B plus. I think it's really 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 strong. You could draw a bunch of cards off of it. If ever you're in a situation where you feel like you can't draw a card, like you don't have the time, then one, you're probably under pressure, in which case gaining life is going to be good, and you could still activate it to get a scry, so you can like dig into your deck, look for what you need to get out of this situation, and eventually it'll like bolster your life total back up, and hopefully you drew some cards off it along the way. So even if you don't get the full draw 4 off of it, I think it is still worth it, and it can draw 4. And it bolsters your life total. I think the whole package together makes this like a B plus. It can be a little slow. You got to dump a bunch of mana into it to get the full effect out of it. But the fact that it has the option to like not even sink your mana into it, and then it like kind of gives you that like anytime like something mana expensive has gain life stapled to it, it's really 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 strong because it kind of like helps buffer you from the punishment of spending mana on something that's not affecting the board by getting your life total back up, you know. So yeah, I think B plus for Maze Mind Tome. I think it's really strong. All right, Mesmeric Orb. It's a 2 mana artifact. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. Well, how do you rate this? This is such a wild effect. I don't know what to make of it. So, as with every mill card, there is the mill yourself or mill your opponent conundrum. Well, I mean, like, now granted, this does both, but what I mean is that, like, is this a card that you're playing to mill yourself and set up your own synergies, or is this a card that you're playing to kill your opponent with, right? Um, I think it is too. This card just seems like too much of a loose cannon to me, in the sense that like it's so out of control either way. Like it's going to be hard, like depending on what you're doing, to like if you're trying to set up synergies for it for yourself, right? It could be really deadly. It could be really like you can like put yourself in a prison where it's like, oh, I actually can't tap what I need to tap because I'll kill myself by setting up my own synergies with this orb. Like it's so reckless. It's so reckless. And and then also like it kind of affords your opponent like the same thing where it's like you could kill your opponent with it, but up until the point that you kill them, you're actually like setting up their synergies for them. So like that's also reckless. It just seems like reckless is the only, I know I've said it like 15 times, but it's the only word that I can think of to describe this card. It is just utterly reckless and just like a loose cannon. You just like unleash it upon the world and it causes chaos up until somebody dies. Like, it's, I know it's not the Mirari, but like between the art and like the way that like it affects the game, not mechanically, but like kind of in the same way that like the Mirari was this like orb of madness. That is what this Mesmeric orb is making me think of here. Um, it's just too loose. It's just too loose. I think it's an F. Like, you could maybe set up your own stuff with it. You could kill an opponent with it, but it's like, I don't know. It's like the nuclear option. It's just too risky, I think. Maybe if you really are going in on the mill stuff, maybe you want to go for it. Or if you have like multiple ways to mill your opponent, like if you're going on like a full on like mill kill game plan, you can do that. Good luck. Good luck. This is not my kind of card. All right, we have Millstone. It is a 2-mana artifact, 2 and tap, target player mills 2 cards. Okay, all right. So this is the opposite of the Mesmeric Orb. If the Mesmeric Orb is like nuclear war, a Millstone is like afternoon tea. It is like just so like controlled and polite and like conservative, and it does like the exact same thing, except it's like so focused, except it's like really like mana inefficient. Um, I don't know how into playability this gets actually. If you are really going in on the mill strategy yourself, you can do that. And again, you don't really threaten to like kill yourself with this thing in the same way. So like you can like slowly do it. So the problem with this card is it's a do nothing, like, right? It's like you're basically throwing a card in the garbage when you cast this. And then it's also like really mana intensive. And then your reward for that is like a couple of mills. So that tells me it's probably not good enough, even as like a synergy support card. Like, there's better ways to do this in the set. Like a number of cards I've reviewed so far, it strikes me as the kind of card that you can cast to set up your synergies if you drafted a synergy based deck that didn't get there with better ways. There's a lot of cards that fit into that bubble. I think this is one of them. Um, so yeah, I just don't see it as actually like a reasonable way to mill yourself. It's just too expensive for what you're getting out of it, even if you do have like good graveyard synergies. It's so slow, so expensive. And then again, you can kill your opponent while risking setting up their synergies. But in the same way, it's like so slow and so expensive. Unlike Mesmeric Orb or like a number of the other mill cards like Keening Stone that we've seen, this is so slow in doing what it does that if your opponent has any graveyard synergies at all whatsoever, like the thing about Keening Stone, kind of like I said, is like it threatens to kill your opponent in like just like a couple of untaps. Like in certain board states, they don't even get a turn where they get to untap with their fully stocked graveyard to use their graveyard synergies. The Keening Stone just kills them. This is the opposite of that. It's like you like nickel and dime them, and they have like 100 years in order to like use all of the cards that you're dumping in their graveyard for them. So I don't think that this makes for a good self mill synergy piece or for a good win condition mill piece. So I think it is an F. I think it is an F, and you don't want to play it. But it's like a synergy build around D, both in that like if you're going for the mill kill or if you're going for the self mill plan. But it's like so low impact for how much mana you're paying for it that I just can't get behind it. All right, here we have Mind's Eye. It is a 5-mana artifact. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. Okay. So this is what? This is like an A minus. Um, I mean, this is a bomb, right? It's slow. You have to pay, it's a 5-mana artifact, and then you have to pay additional mana. You kind of cast it as a 6-drop typically. Like you cast it like on, your turn where you have 6 mana and you pay 5, and then immediately on their draw step, you draw a card. But the fact that your opponent's drawing a card every single turn means that like they don't even have to like be casting card draw spells or anything like that. Also, like you can get extra cards off of it if they cast like the Phyrexian Rager card or whatever and draw cards off that. It's like you get to basically just take 2 draw steps a turn, like every turn of the game, and then plus some, all for like this 5-mana artifact. Yeah, it has up mana every turn, but it's like what it almost says like sacrifice a power stone on it. Okay, you know. It is slow. The reason I give it like an A minus is because like it doesn't defend you at all. So it is like slow in that regard, and it like does take time for this to start paying off. But you just get to draw infinite cards off of this for the entire game. Like cards like that have to be incredible, right? And it's not like the effect is like so expensive that it's really outlandish. You can even like accelerate this out with Power Stones. I mean, you could cast this on turn 5 with the Power Stone ready to go to like use the ability. And just from that point on, you get to draw 2 cards for the rest of the game. How do you beat that? So I think that this is an A minus. Um, It's only not an A because like you can get ran over. Like your opponent's just like playing a bunch of creatures out, and then this looks really bad. You know, if you're like under a lot of pressure and you need to defend yourself. Otherwise, you'll just draw on your opponent card advantage. This card's great. All right, Mishra's Bauble is a 0 mana artifact. Tap, sacrifice Mishra's Bauble. Look at the top card of target player's library. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So I don't know how to rate this kind of stuff. You know, it's pretty tough because again, this is like pretty painless, but it also doesn't do anything. It like triggers your artifact synergies once and then just replaces itself. A danger of cards that replace themselves if they are spells is that it does just kind of increase your land density. Imagine you play like 23 spells, 17 lands like typical, and then this is one of your spells. Well, you're basically playing like 22 spells, 17 lands, so it ever so slightly increases your flood out chance. Um, but that's very minor. But also the effect's very minor. It's like what you trigger like an artifact synergy once and then cycle, and then you get like deck thinning. But it's like a very minor amount of deck thinning, so it like very minorly increases your chance of drawing lands. But it also very minorly increases your chance of drawing your bombs while triggering your artifact synergies. Again, I'm just gonna put it at like C. I think this is like closer to a C minus because you don't get the card immediately. But it's like it doesn't hurt at all, but it doesn't do anything. So do you stick it in your deck? It's probably better. Like I tell you what, where this is probably good is like if and this happens in your draft sometimes where it's like you didn't quite get enough playables. Like if this replaces any card that you're like not really that thrilled about playing in your deck, it's probably worth it. If you have a deck that's like jam packed full of like B level cards and you're like, geez, what do I cut? Like probably not. It's probably fine to like leave it on the cutting room floor, but like you could even just like cut a land for it in that case or something. Like it's, you know, you could slip it into your deck. I think it's really minor either way, you know. um Maybe like a Frank Karsten type could crunch the numbers and like tell you like, no, you're supposed to play your baubles every time because they make your like deck like this much better or whatever. But like whatever, you know, it's so minor. I would say like if you cut your worst card for bauble every time, that's probably fine. All right, Mox Amber. I'm pretty sure this is an F. It's a 0 legendary artifact. Tap, add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and or planeswalkers you control. Now, there's just not enough legends. Like you just really can't count on getting this into play. And then even if you do like get a legend, it's like you get to play this like ramp artifact that's like it just like makes a mana, and like that's your win for playing this like super risky card that like forces you to only play it alongside your legends. Even then, it's like you like have a legend, you like cast your legend, and you have this mox, and then the legend just dies, and this goes back to doing nothing. No, it's just an F. All right, Mystic Forge is a 4 mana artifact. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library. Pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library. Okay, so this is a build around, but it's like a build around like I don't know, like B plus, maybe A minus. Like if you have a bunch of artifact and colorless spells, this can just like, you know, machine gun cards off the top of your deck, and like it can clear stuff from off the top. Now it says artifact spells and colorless spells. So even though lands are colorless, lands don't actually work. Like it's you do have to get lands out of the way. So maybe this isn't that amazing, you know. So that's why I only put it in like the B plus range. Like it's like a build around B plus, where like if you have a bunch of artifact spells, this is actually kind of nice. But if you don't, even if you have like 10 artifacts, like this isn't good enough, you know. So you really got to get there with like a real critical mass of artifacts. I think at the point that you're playing like, man, actually, now that I think about it, like I'm thinking like even if you play like 15 or 16 artifacts, which is like the vast majority of your spells, then you're only playing like 7 non-artifact spells. Even then, it's still kind of not good enough. Actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this card just isn't good enough. I think the number of artifacts that you have to play to make this worth it is so absurd that like while it could be reasonable if you were playing like just like an all artifact deck, I think that the number of artifacts you'd have to be playing to make this worth it is just not realistic. Um, yeah. So I think it might be an F, but if you really, 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 really get there, it's like a B. Okay. Okay, quick break. I'm dog sitting for the weekend for a friend, and so my buddy just dropped his dog off. She seems to have entered a state of calm, but there's suddenly a barking Australian Shepherd in the video. I apologize for that. I think she has gotten over that for the time being, but at any moment, things can turn around. So let's get back at it. So up next, we have Ornithopter. Ornithopter is a 0 mana flying thopter. It's a 0/2. It just doesn't do enough. Like it's even though there's like a bunch of artifact synergies in the set, you can pay this for 0. Like just playing this, it's like such a non-card that like it just doesn't do anything. It's not where you want to be. Um, for as many synergies as you could possibly pile onto this thing, they'd have to be absolutely insane to make it worth it. Like to play just a simple 0/2. So it's an F. And again, the synergies have to be way better than you'd think they are to even make this close to worth it. Up next, Perilous Vault. It is a 4-mana artifact, 5 and tap, exile Perilous Vault, exile all non-land permanents. Yeah, yeah, I mean, this is a Wrath of Wraths, it's expensive and kind of slow, but you can actually run it out. I mean, you could run it out with Power Stones. It eats your Power Stones, but I mean, it's something that you can do to keep yourself safe. Cards like this end up usually playing pretty good. They put your opponent in a weird spot where it's like they have to like commit more to the board than they already have. Like they have to choose whether they want to commit more to the board than they already have. And so like you could like block them up with like a single creature, and like while they might have plays to get around it, then they're like, well, do I try to get around it because of the Perilous Vault? And then of course you could just eat everything with it. So these cards, they can be awkward, but like in controlling decks, they end up being pretty good. I think you're supposed to pick this card high. I think it's like a B plus. Like it's just such a powerful effect that can get you out of so many problems that like, and because like you see it coming, you can play around it and all that, that it tends to be worth it. But you do have to be careful with like symmetrical effects like this, that you can like end up in awkward spots where it's like you just own yourself more than them, or if you're like putting on more pressure than they are, like like maybe you're in a situation where they have like a million cards in their hand and actually the onus is on you to like try to get the job done, and then you have this like wrath in your hand. It's not really worth it. But so despite the fact that it's like awkward sometimes and it can be on the expensive side, the effect is so high power that it is good enough. All right, Phyrexian Processor. Phyrexian Processor is a 4-mana artifact. As Phyrexian Processor enters the battlefield, pay any amount of life. 4 and tap, create an XX black Phyrexian minion creature token, where X is the life paid as Phyrexian Processor entered the battlefield. Okay, this is a bomb. It can be risky because the nightmare scenarios you pay 4 and like 4 or 5 life, and then this just eats a disenchant, and it's like, wow, you really got blown out. But if that doesn't happen, being able to make like a sizable creature every single turn of the game for 4 mana is like really awesome. I mean, that's just a bomb level card. I do think that the right amount of life is about 4 or 5. 3 could be okay, but then you're like really overpaying for the 3/3, which isn't the worst thing. I mean, 3 life isn't like a lot either, so it like really limits the blowout potential. But I generally find like the extra life points probably worth it to be making 4/4s instead of 3/3s, and then that's about where I find is about right, is about 4, because you could even like pay 5, but like 5 life is a lot more than 4. It really depends on like how stable the game is, what your life total is, and how much you can risk. Obviously you want to pay more into this, like as much into this as you can without being a maniac. And also like this works a lot better in decks where you have like a lot of life gain to offset it, or not even to offset it, but it's like if you're at like 24 when you cast this thing, I mean you can like threaten to make giant monsters. I mean you can pay 8, and then like from 16 life, I mean it's like that's still like such a safe life total that you're just like spitting out 8/8s every turn. So a little slow, but and it can cost life. Like the price is high, but the power is worth it as long as it doesn't just get eaten. So just be smart about when you cast it. Even against really aggressive decks, like if you don't pay too much life, if you keep your life total high enough, the thing is, like even against aggro decks, if you are generating an extra 4/4 every turn, like that's a great way to clog up the board. So I would start this out at like A- bomb level, but you do got to be careful. It could end up being a little risky. And you could just end up dying to like paying a bunch of life, and then this thing just dies and you just got blown out massively. um, but yeah, good card, good card. Phyrexian Revoker is a 2-mana Phyrexian Horror. It is a 2/1. As Phyrexian Revoker enters the battlefield, choose a non-land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated. So I think this card's pretty good. 2-mana 2/1 body's okay. Again, I've mentioned this a number of times, but 1 toughness creatures are at a little bit of a liability with so many soldier tokens running around. But apart from that, I mean, a 2-mana 2/1 is still like fine. Not everybody's gonna have a token, so it still like beats, and it still trades off with like 2 toughness attackers and all that kind of stuff. So it offers everything that like a 2-power 2-drop has to offer. And there's actually a bunch of activated abilities in this set. So being able to shut off things like can actually like turn off really critical spells for your opponent. So I actually think the ability is like somewhat at a premium here compared to a lot of different a lot of different cards. So I actually think Phyrexian Revoker is decent. It seems like a B minus. It's like kind of like a high end 2-drop, not insane or anything, but solid. So I like it. All right, up next is Platinum Angel. Um, yeah, Platinum Angel, 7 mana, Angel, 4/4 flying. You can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. Well, hello. So, I mean, definitionally a must answer. I mean, this thing has to get off the board for you to even lose. At 4/4, it's pretty sizable. You know, this is just going to like eat whatever removal your opponent has to point at it. But the thing that's kind of nice about it in a weird way is that it's a 7-drop. And so ideally your opponent will have spent like most of the removal as long as they don't see this thing coming. You know, there's a good chance that like they don't have any removal left if you presented other reasonable targets for it, and so like this could just sail to victory. If it just dies, of course it's like a little loose, you know, because a 7 mana 4/4 flying is like stats wise is not amazing, but the fact that it puts your opponent in a position where they just absolutely have to kill it or lose is quite good. And there's a lot of ways to like, you know, get cards back from the graveyard in this game. So like even if it dies, you could bring it back. Like what if your opponent this becomes like a must answer twice? Like that's great, right? So like I don't know. I think this is like another like A minus level where it's like, yeah, if it just dies, it doesn't really do a lot, and like a 4/4 flying for 7 isn't great stats. You know, you do still have to like figure out how to win the game at a certain point, right? But between like the ability to like get things back from the graveyard and just like how strong it is like on its own and in its must answer nature, I think it's really solid. Um, okay. Up next we have Precursor Golem. Precursor Golem is a 5 mana golem. It is a 3/3. When Precursor Golem enters the battlefield, create 2/3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell that targets only a single golem, that player copies that spell for each other golem that spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those golems. Okay, so this card is really strong. Just up front, creating 3/3/3 bodies for 5 is absurd stats. That's absurd. That's 9 power for 5 colorless mana. That's unreal. That is so good. Um, Now the joke is that like your opponent can cleanly clean them all up by like just pointing a removal spell that works on them at like the precursor golem itself, um, and it can clean up those. And if you have any other golems on the battlefield, that'll get got too. It does work with your pump spells in the same way that like it like powers up all your pumps. So if you have a bunch of pumps, this becomes like extra nice. But that's really just gravy. Like I'm not even like rating the card based on that because like really what you're paying for is 3/3/3s for 5. And then even like the downside where it's like your opponent like points a removal spell at the precursor goal and cleans them all up. Like this just got a 1-for-1. Like they just got out from under it. Like it's basically just like absurd stats, and it kind of has like the like without the busted part of like, and then your opponent also needs like 3 removal spells. It's like absurd stats, but your opponent can just kill the removal spell and get out from under it. And so I think it makes it like way more fair that you're playing like 9 power for 5 mana. So it, already right there, it's really excellent. Again, any sort of pumps you could put on this, it's really just gravy. You really don't need to do anything like that, but it does become insane when you do that. And then there's also the bonus of like, if you can get the precursor golem itself killed, um, then the multiple golem targeting ability doesn't work. So like say you like play precursor golem and then you like sacrifice this golem to like the precursor golem itself to like some other ability that wants like sacrifices. Now your opponent can't do the like easy cleanup of like all your golems because once precursor golems off the battlefield, the other golems don't have the ability. So you can even get around it that way. It also becomes an incredible rebuy, you know, because you can like create like even more golems now, and like it's like an incredible ETB, you know. So yeah, overall, like Precursor Golem, I think is about an A minus. It's just so absurd stats. Even if your opponent can just clean it up for a removal spell, even that like fail state is just not the end of the world because it's like okay, like any other card. I mean, Platinum Angel is the same thing, right? It's like okay, like it's still like a 1-for-1 if your opponent plays a removal spell at it. All right, but otherwise, it's just like a gigantic board presence for one single card, on top of occasionally working positively with your own positive spells as well. All right, up next, Pristine Talisman. Pristine Talisman is a 3 mana artifact. Tap, add colorless. You gain 1 life. Now, you may surprise. This may surprise you to hear that I actually kind of like this one compared to a lot of the other 3 mana artifacts. Now, it doesn't make colored mana at all. It only makes colorless mana. So right there, like that's a pretty big downside. Well, all the other ones make colored mana, right? Yeah, but typically making the colored mana is like not the most important part of those spells. Like you typically just want them for like to make uh, I'm so sorry. My roommate's dog is also barking. Um, you typically just want them to like make mana, and the color doesn't really matter. Um, and this one has Gain a Life on it. Gain a Life is a gigantic difference. It is a huge difference because the problem with these type of effects is you're paying 3 mana to put a mana source into play, which does ramp you and gives you more mana to work with, but you're like taking a turn off to like create that effect. Which kind of exposes you. It puts you in danger. You're not defending yourself. You're not applying pressure or anything like that. Pristine Talisman gaining you life every time that you tap it um, goes a really, really, really long way to alleviate the fact that you took a turn off to get this spell into the battlefield in the first place. So it really, actually, I like these of all of like the 3 mana artifact spells that I've reviewed so far that like create mana. This is the best one of all of them because gaining a life like regularly every single turn, this will quickly, especially if the game goes long, this will give you an absurd amount of life. If the game goes like like 10 more turns after this one card gained you 10 life on top of ramping. 10 turns is a lot. That's like definitely on the high end, but that is something that can happen. Even if it only goes like 4 turns. Okay, this card gained you like 4 life. That's a lot of life to be stapled to your like mana ramp type card. Not only does it gain you a bunch of life, like just like kind of incidentally while also ramping your mana, but also, unlike a lot of the other mana generating cards, this has utility once the mana is no longer good. Part of the problem with like cards that just generate mana is that like when you hit a point where you no longer have anything to do with all of that extra mana, and now that card has like it's no longer accomplishing you anything. It might have ramped you out for a turn or two, allowed you to cast your 6 drop on turn 5 or whatever. Yay, yippee. But then once all those spells are spent, if you have nowhere else to put the mana, you've now like you got the bonus out of it. You paid the cost, got whatever bonus you could out of it, and now it's back to doing nothing. And it's like kind of like you wish you just like had another real spell. Well, Pristine Talisman, even when you no longer need the mana, will continue to gain you life. So I like Pristine Talisman way more than the other mana spells. I still think it's only like a C minus or so, but I think that this one is way more reasonable than pretty much all of the other mana rocks that we've seen so far. I think it's the best of them. All right, Psychosis Crawler is a 5 mana Phyrexian horror. Star. Psychosis Crawler's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Okay, so I think Psychosis Crawler is decent. It actually ends up generally being a little bit smaller than like you want it to be, because you generally want to play your spells, and you'll get to a point where like this thing's only like a 2/2 or whatever. So size-wise, it can be a little bit small, but if you're drawing extra cards, it actually can be like a reasonably sized creature. And if you're drawing extra cards, like this will eventually like nug your opponent to death. It's not insane or anything, especially because again, like if you draw this like late in the game and you only have like 2 cards in your hand, like this is like pretty small. But even though it's small, it like has the ability to like go over the top and still kill your opponent. And knowing that you have it in your deck, you could do things like not play extra land because you just know that you don't really need it, and it might make your Psychosis Crawler bigger. So it can be both a reasonably sized creature and like kind of a win con on its own. Altogether, I think it's like a B minus. It's not absurd or anything, but the ability to like eventually like have the inevitability of killing your opponent just by passively drawing cards is pretty good. And knowing that you have it, you can play around with it to make sure that it's a reasonably sized creature. Just be careful because sometimes it is like a 5 mana 1/1 or 2/2, and then it's like really pretty small. So it can get you in trouble sometimes. It can be a little bit slow for its size, but it does finish the opponent in a number of game states. All right, Quicksilver Amulet. It's a 4 mana artifact. 4 and tap. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Yeah, these cards typically don't play nearly as well as you'd think they would. There have been cards like Elvish Piper, or there was the one in Crimson Vow. It was like the werewolf that did this. But the difference between this and those cards is like those are like actually creatures, and so like they can like do real things on the battlefield. Whereas this is only ever like this like dorky artifact that just sits there. And so it's a kind of like a ramp spell that like in a way like super ramps but is like very expensive and like only like works with like creatures. It gives all your creatures flash. There's something to be said for that. But it's like a terrible top deck. You need to be like casting like really expensive creatures for this to be worth it. Like if you cast this, if you Quicksilver Amulet out like a 6-drop, that's not nearly good enough. You spent this entire do nothing card on just getting the 6-drop into play, and you played 4 and then like 4 again. So it's like you paid 4 up front and then like 2 additional mana, or I'm sorry, 2 less mana later to like cast the 6-drop. Not even the realm of close to good enough. Um, if you're casting like a 9 mana creature with this, it can be decent, but the cost of an entire card out of your hand, and it still is like relatively slow, and it's like terrible off the top. All in all, I think that this is an F, with the caveat that if you have like a bunch of like prototype cards in your deck, and so you have like actually like a whole host of really expensive cards, um, you can have some absurd turns where it's like, on turn 5 you go like 9 drop, turn 6 10 drop, and it's like, okay, I mean that's pretty unreasonable. But that's like far and away the ceiling with this card. That's like getting pretty close to Magical Christmas Land. Like it doesn't work that way very often. This is, in most cases, I think it is an F. And occasionally it will spike and it'll slam something big on the table ahead of schedule at instant speed. It's the kind of card where I don't recommend playing it, but I bet you somebody at some point is going to just drop like a 10 mana creature like on your 5th turn, like at instant speed, and like eat your attack, and it's going to be like, wow, this amulet was insane, but like I just don't think it's good enough most of the time. All right, Quietus Spike. It is a 3-mana equipment. Equipped creature has Death Touch. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. I don't know what to make of this one. 3 and then 3 is a really expensive cost. But giving all of your creatures Death Touch mean that like all of your creatures can trade up with your opponent's best creatures for like the entire game. Like all of your creatures become trade champions forever, which is really pretty good. And then they also become like must blocks in a way, because like they like just like take so much damage from the spike that like your opponent kind of like has to block like every single 1/1 token that you put this on. But the cost is so high that I just don't know how reasonable it is. I think this comes out to about like a C or a C minus. I think there are going to be board states where this like kind of owns, and you could just like continuously trade this card up, um, or like trade your creatures up, even though you're paying like 3 mana to equip every turn. You could just like trade a token up with their good creature, trade a token up their good creature, trade a token up for their good creature, and then you have like just a much better board. That's a reasonable play pattern. Or you can continue to pressure with like, say you have this like on a flyer or something like that. That's really deadly. That's really deadly. So maybe it's a little bit better than that. Maybe it's like a C plus, with the big caveat that sometimes it's just going to be too expensive for you to actually be able to do this, and it's just not going to be effective because you can't actually afford to like move this thing around all the time and maintain a board presence. So it could trip you up sometimes, even though the effect is powerful. All right, we have Ramos Dragon Engine. Ramos is a 6-mana 4/4 flying. Whenever you cast a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Ramos Dragon Engine for each of that spell's colors. Remove 5 +1/+1 counters from Ramos. Add white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green. Activate only once each turn. Okay, so clear combo. If you get Ramos and you get 5 +1/+1 counters on Ramos and you have Door to Nothingness, you win the game. Well, that's incredible, right? Um, let's just pretend for a moment that you don't have Door to Nothingness with this card. How good is it? It's okay. It's all right. And it's a 6-mana 4/4 flying. That's a little on the small side, but it does get bigger as you start to cast spells. There aren't a lot of multicolor spells in the set. It's like some of the rares and some of the uncommons. It's very much the minority. So this basically, for the most part, reads whenever you cast a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Ramos. That's decent. I mean, the thing is, like, once you cast 2 spells, you've cast a 6-mana 6/6 flyer, which is like definitely in like rare territory. 6-mana 5/5 flyer is like not even like, don't get me wrong, that's pretty good, but that's not even like insane rare or anything like that. So it's like a B plus. It's like a B plus. Like you cast this, it's a little bit small on the turn you cast it, so it's not great on blocking the turn that you cast it. But the next turn it's attacking is a 5/5 or maybe even a 6/6, and the next turn it's attacking is a 6/6 or whatever, And yeah, I mean it's like a reasonable spell. It's just not nuts or anything like that. I don't think that, even Door to Nothingness joke aside, like I think it's probably going to be pretty rare that you ever activate the second ability. Like at the point that you've like cast Ramos and cast 5 more spells, like what are you using that mana on? It's probably not happening. This is just like a 4/4 flyer that like gets bigger over time, which is decent. It's like B plus range. It's pretty good. All right, Runechanter's Plague is a 2-mana equipment. Enchanted creature, or sorry, enchanted. Equipped creature has first strike and gets +X/+0, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. Equip 2. Yeah. So Runechanter's Pike owns if you have instant and sorcery cards. It's a little bit of a build around. But once you have like, like 9 or 10 instant or sorcery cards, maybe not even that many, but like you want to have like as many as you can, but like, that might even be a little high. The equipability on this is it's so good. First strike and a sizable power pump, like once you get like +2, +3 on this thing, makes combat so annoying for your opponent. Your creatures become like impossible to block profitably. Like it's just like engaging with them in combat is just a nightmare. And then even if they do like successfully like double block in a way that like allows you to kill whatever creature you have this equipped to so that they can get through the first strike damage and still kill the creature you have this on, then they just get to do it again by putting it on something else. Like this is exactly the kind of thing you want your equipment to do. It just makes all of your creatures just such a nasty threat over and over and over again for really not a bad price at equip to. And it even does like the really annoying thing of playing double duty, where it's like you can equip this onto an attacking creature, attack, and then put this on a different creature to block. And now it's like they can't block attack, they can't block your creatures, and they also can't attack into your creatures. And then all of your like if they like use removal spells or whatever to get around it, you just put it on something else later. Runechainer's Pike is a bomb. It's like it's in the right deck, it's like an A minus, honestly. Like this card really is that annoying on creatures. Like or in decks where it's like you have like the spells to use with it. It's even like a B plus. Like even if you only have like one or two cards, like giving first strike and like even just like +2 +0 is really 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 annoying. So typically I don't like equipment because I don't think that the costs and the risks offset the what you gain out of them. Runechainer's Pike is different. This card is just a nightmare. It is a nightmare. Just play against this card one time and you'll see what I mean. It's really, really, really super annoying. So I think it's like close to an A minus. Really super strong card. All right, we have Scrap Trawler. Scrap Trawler is a 3-mana 3/2 construct. Whenever Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card in your graveyard with lesser mana value. Okay, so it's like a little bit of a build around. You want to have a bunch of artifacts in your graveyard. It helps if you're milling a little bit to make sure that you have targets for this. But even if you miss a little bit on that, like you don't have like a ton of synergies with it, it's at its worst a 3-mana 3/2. So you know, again, I talk down on 3-mana 3/2s all the time, but the reality is like it's a fine body size as long as like it has like a decent ability attached, and that's about where you're at with it here. 3-mana 3/2 is like really a reasonable body for a card that can draw you a bunch of cards over the course of the game with a little bit of setup. And even if you don't draw like a bunch of cards, even if you get one card off of this, 3-mana 3/2 is amazing. So yeah, you want to make sure you have like a bunch of artifacts, a bunch of cheap artifacts, or alternatively a bunch of expensive artifacts, so that when those die, then your medium artifacts can like come back or whatever. Um, and again, maybe self-mill to make sure that you have targets at the time that your opponent's dying, or your opponent's dying, your creatures are dying. But like, even if you're missing on some level of that, it just really doesn't take a lot of work for you to get a card or two off of this. At which point, your 3-mana 3/2 is like perfectly reasonable. I think this card's like a B plus, you know, and in certain situations, it's going to be even better than that. You know, it's like if your deck is full of colorless spells and you just keep Scrap Trawler alive and then just trade off like a bunch of your stuff and like buy back a bunch of cards with this. I mean, this card can really swing a game. You want a bunch of artifacts. You want a bunch of artifacts to make this work, but yeah, even like again, even if you only get like one or two cards back, you've really got your value worth out of this. So Scrap Trawlers are like a really nice pick. All right, we have Sculpting Steel. Sculpting Steel is a 3-mana artifact. You may have Sculpting Steel enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield. This card's really good. This card's really good. It's just a clone, but it's like the cheapest clone ever at 3 colorless. I mean, that's like Phyrexian Metamorphics if you don't have to pay the life. Now, you don't have to, you can't just copy any creature, but you can't copy any artifact. So this can copy your opponent's like non-creature artifacts too, which you might want to do on occasion. It really depends. I mean, there's only some that you want to do that with, but like there's a chance that you might want to do that. Like if they have the like Reality Anchor or whatever that, the Temporal Anchor or whatever that card is, like maybe you copy that, you know. And then most of the time you'll just copy an artifact creature with this. And like, you say you even like just like copy like a 3-mana artifact creature with this. Okay, like you just like made like a perfectly even exchange. Like it's just like you played a 3-mana creature basically, and that's perfectly acceptable. But unlike a lot of cards where it's like, it's like how do I put this? You've heard me talk down on some cards where it's like, oh, you're just making like an equivalent mana exchange. Well, that is not good enough because the card has fail states, and so just going like, you know, if all this could do was like copy a 3-mana or less creature, or I'm sorry, a 3-mana or less artifact, I'd be less keen about it because like you know, it has the fail state of there's no artifact that you want to copy. So cards with fail states, just like playing this as like a 3-mana artifact, is not really good enough because the fail state on the card is attached, right? But that's not what this card does exactly. Like you can copy like your opponent's like 9 or 10 mana artifact creatures. So even if they like run something sick out on you, then you just Sculpting Steel and you just match them card for card, but except yours cost 3 mana. This card is great. This is like close to an A minus, probably not in like impact on the battlefield A minus, but as far as like utility wise, like it's just an incredible card. It's often just going to be like one of the best creatures on the battlefield, like no matter what your opponent's doing, and you've only paid like 3 mana for it. Occasionally it'll be a little awkward in your hand, but the power that this offers is like super worth it. Even if you like just copy like a 5 mana artifact creature, you've still done it. You copy like, you know, like it just like it's not going to take a lot of work to make this like a really mana efficient way of playing the best creature on the battlefield. So you know, maybe that puts it closer to like B plus territory, but just the sheer versatility of it makes it just, this is just like such a high pick card. I genuinely can't imagine passing this card. It is so good. All right, Self-Assembler is a 5 mana 4/4 assembly worker. When Self-Assembler enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an assembly worker creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Yeah, sure. If you're playing the other assembly workers, anyways, then yeah, this becomes a great card. It's like a 5 mana 4/4 draw card. Sure, yeah, why not? Um, Even if you're not, like, say you just like pick this up randomly, then it kind of like incentivizes you to pick up the other assembly workers. So it's not insane or anything, but it's like, yeah, 5 mana 4/4 draw card, and that card is a creature. Even if the assembly workers are like a little overcosted, they're also fine. You know, so this is like a B. It's like a B minus maybe. Maybe closer to a B minus because it's a little overcosted and draws you another overcosted card, and you have to get the assembly workers in your deck. And maybe like if you only have one other assembly worker, you could like draw it, and then this card's just a 5 mana 4/4. So you know, it could be a little on the weak side. But like if you're actually like use the ability on this thing, it's perfectly reasonable. It's probably like B minus level, maybe C plus. It's close there. Again, not amazing, but solid value play. All right, Semblance Anvil. Semblance Anvil is a 3 mana artifact with imprint. When Semblance Anvil enters the battlefield, you may exile a non-land card from your hand. Spells you cast that share a card type with the exiled card cost 2 mana less to cast. Now, I think this is enough. The cost is just way too high. Even if like you do like get like a double spell turn with this thing, like okay, say you only cast like one spell a turn with this thing, right? Well, you basically like turned this card and one other card into like a mana source for just that type artifact, for that type of spell. So say you've like cast this exile an artifact. Now all your artifacts like cost 2 less. That seems decent, but like it's like this card and the exile card are now like tapping for 1 for just artifact cards. It's kind of like Cloud Key, except like kind of worse because it's like eating 2 of your cards to do that effect, you know. And then again, maybe you get to like cast 2 artifact cards on the same turn, and so like they both like tap for 2. But exiling, like playing this and exiling another card is such a high cost for that. First of all, spending 2 cards to do that is like makes the chance that you have like enough gas in your hand that you have double spell turns like makes that like way lower, like for that to even be close to likely. And you probably only get to do that once before it's like, how many like of the same permanent type do you need to have before it's like it becomes impossible to like do that more than once. Like I just think that the costs are way too high for this thing, and it's way too finicky. It just eats up all of your gas while not really offering much in return. That I just can't get behind it. I think it's an F. All right, Sigil of Valor. It is a 2 mana equipment with equip 1. It's a good start. Whenever a creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other creature you control. Okay, I think this card is good. So again, it has the cheap equip cost. I like it, and it has a pretty outsized effect. You know, if you control like 3 creatures, even just like adding +2/+2 to one creature is like pretty good. If you control 4 creatures, what like this is adding +3/+3 to every attack. Maybe it's a little bit worse than I'm rating it because it does only work on offense. So it's not like a card that where you can like, put it. It's not like a permanent +3/+3 on the creature, so that you can also like use it like as a like defensive stalwart. You have to be attacking, and you have to attack alone. So it does kind of like give this like a big drawback on it, but you can set up boards where this becomes a nightmare. Where it's like, especially if you like make some soldier tokens, where it's like this is adding like +4/+4 to like your attacker. So you put it on a 2/2, it attacks as a 6/6. If they kill the 2/2, you put it on a different 2/2, it's attacking as a 6/6. Assuming you cast another creature, I guess, you know. So it makes each individual creature that you're attacking with a really sizable threat. But it does only work when you're attacking, and you can only attack with the one creature, and you spent the entire card on it. This is one of those cards where like any letter grade that I give it is like not going to do it justice because like in certain board states it's going to be an incredible card and in other board states it's going to be really bad. And so like the average ends up being like a C, but like it's going to perform more like a B plus on some boards and then it's going to be like an F on other boards. So it's really contextual. You want to be attacking, you want to be the aggressor and not blocking. You want to be going wide slightly. The awkward thing is like if you're going wide, you can't attack with all the creatures that you're going wide with, right? And so it does have this like big drawback. But there's a lot of boards. The problem with going wide sometimes is that like there's a lot of boards where it's like you actually can't attack through it. It's like you have like 6/1/1s, but your opponent has 3/2/2s or whatever. And it's like you're going wide. Your opponent doesn't even have an impressive board, but they just like you just can't attack reasonably. You can get like 3 damage in and lose half your board, and then you can never attack again. So that's a big problem with the go wide strategies. Whereas this beats that board state, right? You can put this on one of your creatures, attack, and now it's like they have to triple block to get it off the battlefield. And then even if they do that, then you put it on like a different one of your creatures and attack, and it's like, and then so you could like beat the boards that beat your go wide boards with this card, but it kind of only works in that situation. It's a little bit of a siege breaker kind of like it just can punch through on boards that your board of weenie creatures would never be able to do otherwise, and then otherwise it's kind of bad. Like in a lot of situations, like if you have like all it takes, like say you have like 3 2-power attackers. Well, putting this on one of those creatures turns one of them into a 4/4, or I'm sorry, it gives +2/+2 to one of them. So if the way is clear, you could attack for 6, or you could attack with one creature for 4. Like, do you see how much worse that is? So I don't know. In certain board states, it'll be really excellent. In other words, other ones, it's really bad. I think it's like a D, except in certain board states, this is going to like really punch through and it'll be closer to a B. I think that's where I finally land on this. So you just want to really make sure that you want this sort of thing. It's not the kind of card you just slap in every deck. Also works really good with evasive creatures. Like you got a board of creatures and you have like one flyer that's getting through. It makes that flyer a monster, so pay attention to that too. All right, Soul Guide Lantern is a 1-mana artifact. When Soul Guide Lantern enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard. Tap, sacrifice Soul Guide Lantern, each opponent, or exile each opponent's graveyard. 1 and tap, sacrifice Soul Guide Lantern, draw a card. Okay, so I've reviewed a number of cards here so far that like just cycle basically, and so far I've rated them kind of low because like it's just like fine, whatever. Like it's just like cycling for like very minimal effect is like not amazing. This one I like a little bit more because a lot of times this is like cycle, discard a card. Like if your opponent has like an unearthed creature in their sitting in their graveyard, or you know that they're playing like some sort of like reanimator type strategy or something like that, this becomes like a lot better where you get to like eat a critical component out of their graveyard. Even if they just have the cards that care about like 3 creatures in the graveyard or whatever, you can like reduce their creature count some. And then you could just like either just cycle it. And so it's like, yeah, you got to like cycle this, but then like they had like kind of like discard a card on it. Or if they're really going in on the mill strategy, like, they like have like a bunch of cards that care about creature cards in the graveyard, like a bunch of reanimator spells, a bunch of the cards that care about 3 or more, a bunch of unearthed spells, whatever. Like you'll know it when you see it, This can just shut off all of their synergies. So of all of the cards I've seen so far that like just kind of cycle, I think this is the best one of them because it has the highest upside where like it can just turn your opponent's deck off while it's also just cycling. So I like it okay. It's still only like a C level card, but it's like a really free addition to your deck that at some points will just really overperform and just turn your opponent's deck off, which is kind of a nice upside on a basically free card. All right, here we have Springleaf Drum. It is a 1-mana artifact. Tap an untapped creature you control. Add 1 mana of any color. This typically is never good enough. Like, the fact that you have to like play this and have another resource on the battlefield, and then it takes like those 2 resources and all you get is like 1 mana. It accelerates you a little bit, but the cost is so high between this card and tying up another one of your resources that it basically never gets there. It's kind of in some constructed decks, this does like really specialized stuff, but like typically in your limited decks, this just does not have a high enough impact. It's a waste of a card. It just doesn't do anything special and is just really bad. I recommend not playing it. I think it's an F. All right, Staff of Domination is a 3-mana artifact. Bunch of abilities here. We have 1 untap Staff of Domination, 2 in tap, you gain 1 life, 3 in tap, untap target creature, 4 and tap target creature, 5 and tap, draw a card. Okay, so this is really expensive to get to the point where it's like actually doing anything. But if you have a bunch of mana to pour into this, this is actually really pretty solid. You need a bunch of time and space, ideally a bunch of power stones to power these abilities out. But once you hit that, you can start like either like tapping multiple creatures, tapping creatures and drawing cards. We're talking about a lot of mana here, but you can get there, you know. And then even just activating one of these abilities a turn, like if it's just like 5 tap draw a card when you have the mana for it, and you draw some cards off of it. But so the versatility here really does add a lot, because say this card just had 5 tap draw a card on it, and that was like the only ability or whatever. Not nearly good enough. That ability is way too overcosted for like just this card that like was only like drawing you cards. But the fact that this same card has tap or 4 and tap target creature on it means that like on board states where it's like, oh, you're under attack, you can use it as an icy manipulator and like keep your opponent's like best creature locked down with it, right? And on boards where you're safe, you can like increase your value and start drawing cards off of it. So all of the abilities are a little overpriced here, but the versatility of it all makes it, I think, an okay enough combo that this rises in playability. I think it's like a C plus, like maybe a B minus actually, because it does have a high impact effect. It's just expensive, so I probably like a B minus. We're like, yeah, you're overpaying all the time, but the versatility really adds up, and it does have the ability to like really have a high impact on the game. So make sure you're generating lots of mana. But if you are, this card like will both get you to the stage of the like just the tap target creature ability will help get you to the stage of the game where you can start using the 5 tap draw a card ability, and then from there it will run away with the game. So yeah, make sure you make lots of power stones so you can activate this over and over again, and this will perform well for you. If you can't, though, there's a lot of decks where this just simply won't fit in, and that's okay. Oh, big boy, Sundering Titan. Sundering Titan is an 8 mana golem. It is a 7/10. When Sundering Titan enters or leaves the battlefield, choose a land of each basic land type, then destroy those lands. How good is this in limited? It's okay. It's all right. Like you can like lock your opponent out of good plays. What's kind of nice about this card is like if you cast this like even relatively early, like say you're the first one to slam a big robot on the battlefield. Your opponent has some big robots in their hand, but you get the first big robot and it is Sundering Titan. You basically destroy their ability to cast their big robots to contest with this. Even if you have to like choose lands of your own that you have to destroy, that can be annoying. Like if you and your opponent are both playing like 2 different colors each, you will have to eat 2 of your lands. But the fact that you're eating 2 of your lands, like after you have already slammed your big monster on the table, is like a big win. Like because if you're the first one who gets to do that, it's like you break the symmetry there by like having something giant on the battlefield already. So this can be really good. And then of course if you and your opponent are like sharing a color, like it becomes even more asymmetrical. You know, it's like you destroy 2 of their lands and 1 of yours, or even if you're like playing the exact same colors, like you can destroy like just their lands, and that becomes great. You know, so this is like a B level finisher. There are some sets where like this would be like much more absurd because there isn't like a replacement for the 8 mana giant finisher, but because this is like such a replaceable effect, and because it's in a realm with prototypes where a lot of time prototypes will be a little bit better because you can cast them for the cheaper side and still have an 8 mana finisher in your deck, this loses a lot of value. But it can be really annoying to like shut off your opponent's spells while also slamming your own big creature on the table, so it's like a B, I think. Pretty replaceable though. All right, we have Swiftfoot Boots. Swiftfoot Boots is a 2 mana equipment. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. Equip 1. So again, equip 1, I love it. That's what I want to see on my equipment. And this one does have a really outsized effect. Both hexproof and haste. So obviously this adds like both to the creature, but this is really like 2 different abilities. Like clearly it's 2 different texts, right? But basically the 2 different texts give this 2 different main uses. Both of them are excellent and both of them are worth the equip 1. Starting with the hexproof. Well, no, let's start with the haste. So once you have Swiftfoot Boots into play, basically all of your creatures now, like you can pay 1 mana more for them, and all of your creatures now have haste for the rest of the game, which is a really great effect. Sometimes it's not amazing. Like, so there are red enchantments sometimes. It would just kind of know them as fervors. That's another one of those cards where it's like, I think of that as like the archetype, where it's like a red and 2, all of your creatures have haste enchantment. And those cards only play okay because the thing is you're spending an entire card on giving all of your stuff haste, which does actually limit, even though that like helps you apply a little bit of pressure, it does like limit how much pressure you're applying because you have to like tap out for this card and then the card itself doesn't attack. And then Swiftfoot Boots has kind of the same problem where it's like you pay 2 and then you have to like add 1 to like every creature you cast and then it gets haste. But it still is like a nice ability. Like it still does like add like a good amount of pressure. Um, but when it combined with the hexproof, this card like goes like way up in value because then if you ever have any creature that's a nightmare for your opponent, they just can't deal with it, or at least they have like a very tiny window where you try to move the boots over to it, and if they don't have the answer for it right then immediately, they just lose their shot at killing it. You have some sort of nasty flyer that normally they would just point a removal spell at. Well, nope, not anymore. You just can't kill it. You have some sort of like bomb that's gonna like take over the game with like its like ability or something like that. Nope, not anymore. So if it was just the haste on here, I would think this would be like not quite enough. But the fact that this can also protect all of your like excellent creatures from your opponent's removal, I think that this ends up being good enough, like all said and done. You want to be attacking or have some number of critical threats. Like if you're just like slapping this like on your like, like 3/2s or whatever, it's a lot worse, I think you both want to be aggressive and have like nice threats that you really want to protect. Like I said, but if you're doing that, this becomes like a B plus kind of. There's some decks that just won't want this or won't care about it. It also does get a lot better in a world where it's like if they're gigantic like robot monsters, where it's like you finally draw your like 8 mana robot, but you have 9 mana, and so you cast this, immediately equip it. Now it's attacking with haste, and now it can't be killed by removal, and it's like that's a really big game. Of course, now you're like overpaying for your already expensive monster, but this will happen sometimes. So again, it's deck contextual. The cost on this is a little bit higher than it seems because it is an entire card, and it really shouldn't be understated. Like it is a bigger cost than it seems to spend an entire card on this effect, but the combination of hexproof and haste and the cheap cost, I think, gets it there so that it is good enough that you generally want to play your Swiftfoot Boots. All right, Sword of the Meek is a 2 mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+2. Equipped 2. Whenever a 1/1 creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Sword of the Meek from your graveyard to the battlefield, then attach it to that creature. Let's see. If you were just playing this is like, if you let's say you don't make any 1/1s, I don't think it's good enough. 2 mana with Equipped 2 for just a +1/+2, I just don't think is a high enough impact of a card that this becomes very good at all. Like it's a little too expensive. The toughness boost is kind of nice because it does make it harder for your creatures to trade off in combat, but ultimately I just don't think that the card gets there. It becomes like a D. It's better stats that you'd see on some equipment, but it's like not insane or anything. If you're making a bunch of 1/1s, it's like kind of cute because like getting around the equip cost can be kind of nice, and turning 1/1s into 2/3s like is significantly better. But even then, there are boards like, say your opponent just has like a 3/3. Well, then you're still not really getting there with like the 2/3, right? Like what's that going to do? Um, does the Sword of the Meek have to? You may return Sword of the Meek from your graveyard to the battlefield, then attach it to that creature. Does it have to be in the graveyard to like activate that ability, or can you just move it? I think you can just move it without it being in the graveyard, but I might be wrong about that. I'm an experienced Magic player. I should understand how that text works a little bit better, but I'm not 100% on that actually. I think that you can just move it though. I'll have to look into that. I might be wrong. But it is kind of cute. And I will say that like if you're doing the thing where you're like playing the sacrifice deck and you're making a bunch of 1/1s, this becomes like infinite sacrifice fodder while also boosting your 1/1. So it does go up in value there. It becomes actually a pretty reasonable card. So I'd say if you're making a bunch of 1/1s, especially if you like have the ability to sacrifice stuff, Sword of the Meek becomes like okay, it becomes reasonable. I wouldn't just jam this in most of your decks though. I think it's like a D most of the time, and then it gets up to like a I don't know, like a C plus otherwise. They're pretty poor for the most part. I wouldn't worry too much about this card. All right, Thorn of Amethyst. 2 mana artifact, non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Okay. So yeah, this kind of goes into like what I was talking about with like Lodestone Golem. Lodestone Golem at least gives you, it's not the exact same ability, it's like non-artifacts instead of non-creature, right? But Lodestone Golem at least gives you the 4 mana 5/3 to fall back on. Whereas Thorn of Amethyst just is like not good enough because you're spending this entire card on a do nothing that just makes it adds like a little bit of a tax to only your opponent's non-creature spells, which typically so you do want to like you obviously you don't want to like overpay for your non-creature spells, but like say you're like trying to like apply pressure or something, the creature spells are the important ones that are like
creatures are the most important cards to cast on curve. That is what I'm trying to say here. So adding attacks to your non-creature spells can be annoying, but it's not as annoying as like if it like added attacks to your creature spells, where like slowing the creatures down. Like the curve considerations are most important on your creatures, so this hits like the less important half of what you're looking at. And then it's also like kind of a 2 mana do nothing. And then also like your opponents can get to a point where it's like they just don't care about this ability. Like they're generating enough mana that it just doesn't matter. I think Throne of Amethyst is an F. On top of like affecting your own spells, it's just not good. You just don't want to do that. Okay, Unwinding Clock. Unwinding Clock is a 4-mana artifact. Untap all artifacts you control during each other player's untap step. I think this is an F with like some caveats. If you have like a bunch of like artifact creatures, this gives them all vigilance. I mean, that's kind of cute. And then if you have a bunch of power stones, like maybe you can like activate abilities multiple times. It seems really finicky though. It seems like a build around like C minus or something like that, where it's like if you're really going off with artifact creatures or like again like power stones and like power stone activated abilities. Because like even if you're going off with power stones, like if you're doing that to like cast creatures, then like untapping them on your opponent's turn isn't going to do anything. So you need to like be like really going off the activated abilities. Like the best thing that this does is give your artifact creatures vigilance, and I just don't think that that is worth a 4-mana do nothing card. I think that this is an F. Maybe you can really build around it in certain circumstances. Even then, I'm not convinced because it's still a 4-mana do nothing. Like whatever you're getting out of this, it's costing you an entire card in 4 mana, and so I just can't imagine that it's good enough. I believe it'd just be an F. All right. Well of Lost Dreams is a 4-mana artifact. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the number of, or the amount of life you gained. If you do, draw X cards. Okay, this is definitely a build around, but if you have a deck with like a ton of life gain sources on this, or a ton of life gain sources, this actually becomes like a reasonable card draw engine. It's really slow and expensive, so that might not be good enough because you have to pay 4 mana up front and it doesn't do anything. And then you have to gain life. And then when you gain life, you have to spend more mana, and then at that point you draw a bunch of cards. But like, say you gain 3 life, you can pay 4 and then pay 3 and draw 3 cards. And then if you ever gain more life, like say you do that again, you've drawn like 6 cards, and now you've really done it. So if you have a bunch of life gain sources, and you really need a bunch, because if you only have like 2 or 3, well, the Lost Dreams aren't going to do it. So this is probably going to be like an F in most cases, but it can be like a build around card that like gets up there. It could become like a build around like B plus. I think what you really want is lifelink creatures, because it's a lot harder to like cast a spell and that spell gains you life, and then you have additional mana to then draw the cards off of it. Whereas if you have a lifelink creature, not only does the lifelink creature like not require mana for you to like get in combat and gain the life so that you can then use this ability and you have the mana free to do it, but it also can allow you to like do it like multiple times. You know, if you hit it with that same lifelink creature twice and you drew cards off of this card twice, you probably win the game. Like it's really hard to imagine losing at that point. Like if you hit with a 3-power lifelink and you like draw 3, how do you lose, right? Like that just seems absurd. So not just life gain spells, but lifelink creatures where you want to be. That's sad. I don't think there's a lot of lifelink in the set. There's like the Yoshian Soldier, the Yoshian Medic or whatever. It's the 1/4 lifelink. There's the black 5 mana 4/5 that can gain lifelink, but you need to draw an additional card to give that lifelink first. So you have to then like draw a card, then attack with this, then draw more cards. Beyond that, there's not a lot of lifelink. I think if this set was a little bit different, this card would be bomb level, but my guess is there actually isn't enough life gain that that this card really is going to get there. I just don't think that you can hit the critical mass of life gain that you need to get there for this card, but if you do, it is powerful. Maybe if you pick up a couple Pristine Talismans, that's actually quite a good combo, you know? Then Pristine Talisman just reads like tap, gain 1, draw a card. That's pretty good, right? So yeah, it's definitely a build around. This definitely falls in the build around camp where it's like I will wait and make sure I have a bunch of life gain to pick this card before. I don't think picking this card and being like, I will pick up a bunch of life gain cards is going to be a strategy that works, because I don't think there's enough of them that you can reasonably expect to do that unless you like resolve to pick every card that says gain a life on it no matter what. Um, I just don't think you can hit the critical mass that you need to make this card worth it. Last one's a whopper, folks. It is Wurmcoil Engine. It is a 6 mana, 6/6 Death Touch, lifelink. When Wurmcoil Engine dies, create a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Worm artifact creature token. This is also a Phyrexian Worm, by the way. Create a 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Worm artifact creature token with Death Touch and 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Worm artifact creature token with lifelink. Even if you didn't have any artifact synergies, even if there wasn't Power Stones to run this thing out, even if there wasn't a bunch of graveyard synergies to buy it back, even if there wasn't like cool sacrifice stuff so that you could like make like random like 2 blockers instead of 1 or whatever, this card would be an A in any set that this was printed in ever. It's incredible, gigantic stats, lifelink to gain like 1,000,000 life, death touch just in case you need it, which actually could be relevant because there are really giant monsters in this set, so trading off those things are great. Creating 2 additional 3/3 bodies after they died that both have death touch, or that have death touch and lifelink on this. Like this would be an A, even if there was like literally no synergies in the set for it whatsoever. And hey, it's got a bunch of synergy stuff. So yeah, this is like the best rare in the set basically. If you get Wurmcoil Engine, like congratulations. It's like it I think it is literally like the best rare in the set. It's absurd. It's so good. There's really not much more to say about it. It's like A plus even. It's incredible. I guess sometimes it will eat exile removal and it won't do all that much. That's the only time that it's bad, and even then it's not bad. It's just 1 for 1. Yep, card's incredible. So that's all there is to say about that. I wish you many Wurmcoil Engines in your future. I hope you're not playing against me when you get them. I hope I also get them. So yeah, all right, that is all of the retro artifacts. There's quite a few. Like I said, like a lot of them. So I'm a little disappointed because I think a lot of them turned out to be Fs. I think a lot of them should not make your deck most of the time, or are such deep build arounds that like it's not even like build arounds like in the fun way where it's like I don't know why this is the only card I thought of, where it's like Burning Vengeance or whatever, where it's like, if you played it in a Stride draft, where it's like, oh, this is like a super cool thing to go in on, because like if I go in on this, it's like you build this like really unique deck that like incentivizes you to do things that you like wouldn't normally do in order to like make it happen. Or like Joda, something like that, where it's like, oh, like typically you don't really care about legends that much, but maybe I'll play like the 5-color legend card and like pick a bunch of legends and I get to do this cool legend cascade thing. And it gives you this like build around that allows you to like create this unique deck that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, and so it like really adds this like super cool texture to like what you're doing. Not a lot of the cards like reach that level from what I saw here. A lot of them fall in the build around category, where it's more like the opposite, where it's like if your deck is doing these really specific things, then I guess this card becomes acceptable. And then beyond that, like a lot of them were Fs. And so while there's a couple cards here that I thought were really cool and will be like really nice and it'll be like kind of sweet to play with, they tended to fall into like 3 camps. It was like Fs, build arounds in the sense that like yeah, I guess you could play this card under very specific circumstances, but even then I'm suspect and good luck. And then like the third category was like super sick and annoying bombs like Wurmcoil Engine or Runechanter's Pike. So I was like wanting to be, I'm not trying to be a downer here, gang, but like I wanted to be really excited about a lot of these, but a lot of them just didn't really make it. I think like one of the cool, like Sculpting Steel, I think is like a cool addition. I think even though it's like, this almost falls in the Super Bomb category, but I think it's like fair enough that I just think it's like a really excellent, cool card to add. Runechanter's Pike is like bomb level. There's things like Quietus Spike, it's okay. There's like a bunch of Manaliths. Things that are fine, like Psychosis Crawler. But yeah, it's like basically like very few, like, okay, like Platinum Angel's like going to be really absurd. Like this card is like cool to a sense. It's really annoying to lose a game to Platinum Angel though. Like it just feels like, I don't think Platinum Angel is busted, but it feels busted when you lose to it because it's like literally one card. You can't win the game. So it's like, oh, I just didn't have a card that could kill this Platinum Angel. Great, I guess I lose. Like literally, like it's funny. Like that's what you joke about with like some bombs, but like literally the text on Platinum Angel says that. So it's kind of goofy. Um, and then there's like only a few cards that I feel like fall into like the cool role player, like Phyrexian Revoker. I think falls into like the cool texture like role player. But yeah, a lot of this stuff is just like really bad or like super sick bomb category, with only like a few cards like falling in between. Key to the City falls in like kind of in between, where it's like really, really good, like pseudo bomb. It's like not bomb, but like a really, really good card, but like not like overwhelmingly so. But for the most part, like, okay, Ichor Wellspring. This would have been a cool card just to see in the set period. I would have liked to see our Ichor Wellspring printed not in this slot, but just like in the slot, like in the set in general. I think this would have been a cool addition. Um, so yeah, so these are like kind of neat, but I think a lot of them you should just ignore, and then others are like super sick slam, pick this over everything bombs, and then only a couple like fall into the like, oh, interesting that this is in the pack. So yeah, I'm not trying to be negative here, but uh I, I think that like I could have been happier with the list of inclusions. I'll put it that way. Um, that said, like they're all like super cool to like pick and play, and all like the alternative arts is like art pieces. They're super cool, and is like kind of like flavor adds. They're super cool. I'm just talking about strictly for limited gameplay. Um, I feel like the list could have been a little bit different here, and I would have been a little bit happier with it. But we'll see how it plays. I shouldn't be too negative about right out the gate. I couldn't believe how many Fs I was giving out, and then on other ones it's like, oh, except for this like super bomb, you know. But that's just how it is. You know, that's just what's up. So I think it'd be fine. And also it's like not gonna be the end of the world because it's just like one of these in every pack, and so like um, you know, it's not like it's like I just like really like rated like all of the comments in the set and just read that off about them, you know. So it'll be fine. But yeah, so that's all of the retro artifacts. Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see how this plays out. Um, I'm recording this on the 11th. Brothers War officially releases on the 15th. I think I'm probably not going to get another Dominaria draft in. I think I'm sunsetting the set for myself, and I'll probably give it a couple days. Might get a Phantom draft in there. We'll see if I got the time, but I might just give it a rest until Brothers War comes out. Because this project, like rating all of these, actually was like a lot more work intensive than I expected. Um, but yeah, we'll see. I might have an upload in between now and then, but otherwise, get ready for Brothers War. And again, if you enjoyed these, if you I gotta remember to start saying this at the beginning of the videos, but if you enjoyed this, remember to please like and subscribe so that you can see those, get the notifications when those come out. And I will see you there. Thanks for watching.